The scene opens with a girl sitting in a car, feeling lightheaded. The driver glances over, hinting that she may have had a few too many drinks. She murmurs that she's dizzy, her mind spinning. Though she knows she should stay awake, her eyes grow heavy. Eventually, she slumps against the car door, and the driver notices, smirking slightly. With a loud screech, the car jerks to a stop in a deserted, rundown area. Another man joins the driver, and together they attempt to harm the unconscious girl. Suddenly, her eyes flicker open, and she asks what they're doing. The new man sneers, saying it's luck she woke up since he was just about to rouse her himself. The driver laughs, telling her to stay still, promising she's in for a good time. Unfazed, she warns them to back off, but they mock her, claiming girls like her scream the loudest. But as one of them starts to unzip his pants, she lashes out, kicking him hard and sending him crumpling to the ground. She opens her eyes fully, coolly saying she tried to warn them. At that moment, police lights flash, and officers arrive on the scene. A lieutenant shouts her name, rushing to her side, noticing bloodstains on her clothes. With a sigh, he mutters that he expected something like this from her. His fellow officers gather around, puzzled, until one recognizes her as Sergeant Hana Lee. She's a top counterterrorism agent, recruited from a special missions unit by a private military company. Known for her spotless mission record, she has a massive bounty on her head. They also mention her twin brother, who works in intelligence, adding to her reputation. One officer marvels that the siblings are high-profile figures in both the private military and intelligence sectors. He wonders aloud why she's in Korea now, and if she'll be joining their team. The lieutenant scolds Hannah, reminding her he specifically told her not to unalive anyone. Unfazed, she responds calmly, assuring him she didn't, though he finds it hard to believe, given the state she left the men in. She explains that, while she was admittedly drunk, she acted in self-defense and may have gone a bit overboard. She hands him evidence from the scene, including a burner phone they used for recording and the knife they threatened her with. She also mentions the recording, emphasizing that their threats with the knife constitute attempted murder and robbery. Plus, with their other vile actions, they're facing charges of sexual assault and intimidation. Hannah looks at the lieutenant, pointing out how clean his shirt is compared to her blood-stained one, and insists he hand it over. Reluctantly, he does, while the officers detain the assailants. The lieutenant thanks her, acknowledging that without her intervention, these men might have walked free once again. But Hannah is more interested in cash than thanks. She points out that he's likely to get a promotion after this, and he eventually agrees to treat her to a drink once his next paycheck comes through, suggesting they wrap up the day with some soju. As they head toward the car, she asks him to keep her involvement under wraps since no one is supposed to know. The lieutenant brings up her brother, Dooyi, and she explains he's been traveling frequently, listing off several places he's been in the past 2 months, including Cambodia last week. The lieutenant comments that Dooyi started receiving real missions soon after he was discharged from the underwater demolition team. Hannah smiles, remarking that her brother has always been sharp, even when handling intense assignments with the overseas narcotics team. Just then, her phone rings, displaying a Cambodian number. Curious, she wonders if it's Dooyi. She answers, only to hear a representative from the National Security and Intelligence Service on the line. A chill runs through her as she realizes it's about her brother. The caller delivers the devastating news: Dooyi didn't make it back from his last mission. The lieutenant, growing impatient with how long Hannah's been on the phone, notices that she's furious, her voice rising as she argues with the caller. He approaches her, quickly realizing she's deeply upset. Hannah is convinced the person on the other end is lying, refusing to believe what they're saying about her brother. Then, without warning, her voice breaks, and she collapses to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The pain feels surreal, as though she's being battered from all sides, trapped in a horrifying nightmare. Later at home, Hannah recalls a moment from her childhood with her brother. He had promised that, when he grew up, he'd protect her from anyone who tried to hurt her. She jolts up from bed, staring at an old photo of the two of them, and then she whispers that he's the reason she returned to Korea. Suddenly, she hears a strange noise and starts searching for the source. Following the sound, she finds a ringing phone. Her heart races. Could it be her brother? She answers, and it's him, but the signal is so faint she can barely hear his voice. She asks where he is and what's going on, but the connection is too poor. Desperate, she tells him to give her his coordinates instead. Through the static, he mutters something about renty and killing. She insists he stay on the line, telling him not to speak, just so she can trace his location. She takes a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. The agency claimed he was dead, yet here he is, calling her. She realizes he must be using an untraceable device, a sign he's in serious trouble. Determined, she knows she needs to get to Cambodia quickly or risk losing him for good. Meanwhile, on the island of Sicily, Italy, a young man emerges from a pool, brushing his damp hair back with his hands. This is Giulio Parenti, the capo of the Sicilian Mafia. He's informed that there's been an incident in Cambodia. When he asks who was responsible, he's told it was Niccolo, who was assassinated on the spot. Without hesitation, he orders his men to prepare for departure, smirking as he says he's sure they're waiting for him. Taejun calls Hana, his voice choked with tears as he apologizes for failing to protect her brother, Dewey. Sergeant Hana, firm and composed, tells him to stop crying and answer her questions. She demands to know where Dewey's body is. Taejun, struggling to keep calm, admits that he doesn't know, they couldn't recover it because of a bomb explosion. He thinks Dewey may have stolen something valuable from the Mafia, and they must have sent a suicide bomber to take him out. Hana listens intently and then orders Taejun to meet her at the main exit of Phnom Penh Airport by 9:20 a.m. Shocked, he asks if she's actually coming to Cambodia. She replies resolutely, saying she's going to find her brother, not just his body, alive. In the bustling streets of Phnom Penh, Hana waits for Taejun's arrival. He finally shows up and explains he's arranged a tuk-tuk for their transportation. Taejun Choi, a member of the National Security and Intelligence Service, was Dewey Lee's closest colleague. Hana asks him why he didn't bring his car, but he explains he's off duty today. When she questions him about visiting his office earlier, he stammers nervously, scratching his neck, and claims he had some urgent matter to handle. Eager to avoid further questioning, he suggests they leave quickly, complaining about the intense heat. Hana, however, seems suspicious of his behavior. Once they're in the tuk-tuk, Hana hands Taejun a phone, requesting the exact location where he last saw her brother. Taejun, visibly sweating, says it was about 75 kilometers north, near Siem Reap, in a remote village. Growing tense, he urges Hana to reconsider her involvement, warning her that things could spiral out of control if the intelligence service found out about her plans. But Hana is unfazed. She cuts him off and demands full details about Dewey, his last mission, contacts, the type of drugs he was handling, what he was wearing when the bomb went off, and even the vehicle he used. Hana tells Taejun he's going to give her everything she asks for, or she'll show him what complicated really means. Reluctantly, Taejun agrees, but insists this will be the last time he's willing to help. Hana and Taejun are now at Dewey's apartment, examining the contents of his fridge. Hana notices the familiar neatness of the apartment and the perfectly organized drinks, just like her brother. Yet, the idea of his death feels entirely out of character, and she can't shake her doubts. Taejun begins explaining that he and Dewey had been tracking a new drug called Ka-947A, focusing on the Italian Mafia's role in its distribution. He tells her that this drug is especially dangerous because it can easily pass as a legitimate medical substance, unlike typical hallucinogens. Taejun confesses that he lost contact with Dewey just before they were supposed to meet up at a location connected to the drug exchange. He went to confront Dewey, only to find out that Dewey had decided to go after the Mafia on his own, a risky connection Taejun says he would never have suspected. After hearing this, Hana is uncertain if she can trust Taejun. His earlier behavior and reactions make her suspicious that he may have already alerted his superiors about her arrival. She decides to keep her distance, using him for information on her brother but staying wary. Realizing that even her brother's apartment might be compromised, she turns the TV on at full volume to block any hidden bugs from picking up their conversation. Hana observes that Dooye, with his almost obsessive love for order, would never leave small details out of place. Whoever searched the apartment knew this about him but missed subtle cues, like the orientation of drink labels and the direction of clothes hangers. Determined to find anything her brother may have left behind, she heads to his room, where she spots a disguised projector he once showed her, a regular-looking lamp with a hidden purpose. As she wonders when he managed to set all this up, she realizes she'll need help and reluctantly considers reaching out to someone she had never planned on contacting again. Hana dials the number and waits. Logan answers with a cheerful tone, but she stays silent, hesitating. After a moment, he laughs and teases her, asking if she's called by mistake, just like she used to do with an old boyfriend. She skips any pleasantries, briefly asking about his well-being. Surprised by her sudden call from Cambodia, Logan questions what she's doing there, but she fires back, half-joking, wondering if he's turned into an ex-lover or a stalker. With a playful grin, he admits he's missed her and hints at his habit of keeping tabs on her. Finally, Hana reveals she needs his help. She promises to share details of her latest case in exchange, hinting it's something he'll enjoy. Intrigued, Logan presses her for more information, and she discloses it involves the Sicilian Mafia, specifically, Giulio Parenti. Logan agrees immediately and asks if she needs anything else, but she only requests her old supply of weapons. In the following scene, we're introduced to Valentine's Day, a private military company that specializes in high-stakes missions. There's nothing romantic about their work. When Valentine's Day targets someone, it means one thing: death. At the Valentine's Day safe house in Cambodia, Hana skids to a stop on her bike. Her former colleague rushes over and greets her with a tight hug, excitedly asking if this means she's rejoining the team. She quickly dismisses it, saying she only needs help, then asks about Logan. Her colleague, a little disappointed, mentions that Logan is inside and guesses about his sudden appearance. Moments later, Logan Valentine, the head of Valentine's Day, steps out. Hana shows him a recording she retrieved from her brother's apartment, revealing connections between high-profile criminals, the FBI, CIA, and the Mafia. It's clear that Giulio Parenti is somehow tied to her brother's disappearance, though officially, he's been declared dead in action. Hana suspects her brother was investigating both the Russian and Italian mobs. Logan raises an eyebrow, skeptical about Parenti's involvement, noting that Parenti is known for having his enemies killed outright, not kidnapped. As they investigate, Hana explains that Parenti has been increasingly linked to Smith and Petrov since a terrorist attack in Chicago the previous year. As they continue watching the projector footage, Logan recognizes a familiar face, Mr. Kong. When Hana presses for more information, Logan hesitates but admits Kong is a client with some very private dealings. They conclude that Mujin Kong, a rising tycoon, has likely taken over some of Parenti's interests. Parenti typically avoids low-level drug operations, so if this information was falsified, someone may have been impersonating him. Logan suggests this type of deception is common in the drug trade, but wonders aloud why Hana's intelligence agency didn't flag it. Perhaps, he suggests, it was intentional. At that moment, a man enters, apologizing for the interruption. He brings news they received that morning: Giulio Parenti's goods were stolen by Mesa, a powerful Cambodian criminal organization. Curious, Hana asks who the man is, and Logan introduces him as Eunseong Yoo, a trusted member of his team. Curious about Eunseong's background, Hana gently nudges him, prompting him to smile warmly. He assures her he's ready to help however she needs during her stay in Cambodia, adding that it's always comforting to meet another Korean here. Meanwhile, back at the house, Taejun anxiously searches for Hana, his nerves fraying as he worries about her safety. Just as he's about to panic, she walks in. Frustrated, he scolds her for going out alone, pointing out the risks in the area. She brushes it off, grabbing a bottle of water, downing it in one go, and then slamming it onto the table. Concerned, Taejun offers to accompany her if she needs to go anywhere, expressing his fear for her safety if she continues wandering on her own. Hana leans against the table, her expression tight and focused. She admits there's a lot she doesn't understand about her brother's case, and about Taejun himself, despite their history. With a firm expression, she pulls out a gun, cocks it, and points it directly at Taejun, urging him to choose his words carefully. She presses him on his information, noting glaring gaps, particularly in the surveillance footage. She recounts how Dooyi was seen entering the building where the mobsters were gathered, only to be dragged out right before the explosion. She questions why the perpetrators showed her brother's face on camera if they intended to kill him, suggesting the footage may have been staged. She points out that the intelligence service's conclusion that Dooyi was dead was based on a video that wasn't even the original, it was edited. Turning her piercing gaze on Taejun, she demands an explanation. Stammering, he confesses they found a body wearing a damaged suicide vest, which made an autopsy impossible. They identified it as Dooyi's only because of a dog tag. Keeping her gun trained on him, Hana announces that from now on, he's an accomplice. She orders him to drop any surveillance on her, promising to believe his lies in return. She instructs him to tell his superiors she hasn't left Dooyi's apartment since yesterday. Reluctantly, Taejun agrees. Hana nods to Eunseong Yoo, her partner, who moves in quickly, incapacitating Taejun. With a quiet scoff, he remarks, "What a heartbreaking betrayal." Hana coolly replies that it's too early to decide, adding they'll see what comes of it. In the next scene, Hana is seen riding her bike. Eunseong, riding alongside, asks if she's planning to leave, and she explains that Logan gave her the coordinates to a safe house and hinted that the Cambodian syndicate might target it soon. Eunseong agrees, noting the strategic significance of the location, and advises her to lay low until they have more orders, as Parenti will likely retaliate for his stolen assets. Determined to get ahead of their enemies, Hana decides to scout out the safe house. Curious, Eunseong then teases her about her romantic life, asking if she's seeing anyone. She nods, and with a good-natured grin, he backs off, promising to stay out of her personal affairs. Bidding her farewell, he wishes her luck on her mission. As Hana speeds off, Eunseong watches her go, murmuring to himself, "What a shame." Arriving at the Valentine's Day safe house, Hana takes in her surroundings. The place is brimming with the echoes of past missions, each room braced for the next operation. Weapons are lined up, ready for action, and she wonders if she's truly prepared for what her brother has dragged her into. Desperately, she hopes he'll somehow let her know he's still out there. Her thoughts are interrupted by a call from Logan, checking in. She assures him that everything is eerily calm on her end, almost too calm. But then, a question that's been nagging her surfaces: is Eunseong Yoo really part of Valentine's Day? She noticed he wasn't wearing one of their distinct badges. Logan pauses, offering no direct answer, only mentioning a challenge related to someone named Lou. Caught off guard, Hana asks about Lou, a name she's never heard. Just then, her nerves spike as a man she's never seen, Lou himself, appears in the doorway. Instinctively, Hana reaches for her gun, aiming it at him. Calmly, Lou introduces himself as Edward Liu. Logan, still on the line, reminds Hana of his earlier warning about Lou's presence. Frustrated, she hangs up. With Lou's sudden arrival, Hana demands answers. He grins and says he thought she might need company. When she presses him, he admits he's got personal business in Cambodia and a score to settle with the Syndicate Mesa, a powerful Cambodian cartel. Not only did they steal from Parenti, but they also committed a murder tied to the Sicilian Mafia. Confused by Eunseong's involvement and Lou's casual attitude, Hana insists Lou stay out of her mission. Lou, amused, promises he won't get in her way, proposing they stick to their respective goals. She'll handle Parenti, and he'll take care of Mesa. But Hana's suspicion flares up. Grabbing Lou by his shirt, she demands to know if he's truly with Valentine's Day. Chuckling, Lou clarifies that he never claimed to be one of their agents, he only offered to help her during her stay. Just as the tension starts to settle, her phone rings again. Logan is back on the line, his tone urgent. He warns her that Mesa is on the move and will reach the coordinates in 3 hours. He describes an intimidating scene, a convoy of 40 heavily armed operatives, moving in a trailer, 2 shipping containers, and 6 trucks. Parenti has already caught on to their movements and is pursuing them. Hana realizes she's staring down a serious battle, and she's left with the daunting question, is she truly prepared to face this? An hour earlier, Hana and Eunseong were deep in discussion about their operation. Hana lays out her strategy to slip into the trailer and disable the front truck's tires. Eunseong, curious, asks if she plans to stall the entire group until Giulio Parenti arrives, and she responds firmly that she has no such intention and proceeds to detail her steps. First, she'll set off a landmine when Mesa's group appears. Amid the resulting chaos, she'll slip into the trailer, and from there, she'll wait for Parenti's arrival. Her goal is to use minimal force, creating just enough of a distraction to get where she needs to be. Listening to her plan, Eunseong urges her to stay safe, hinting that he's developed unexpected feelings for her, and then he encourages her to begin preparing. As they track their targets, Eunseong alerts her that Parenti is indeed with the convoy. After a brief countdown, they initiate the plan, setting off the first phase. But unexpectedly, they see signs of movement inside the trailer. Hana quickly climbs the trailer's exterior, slipping inside just as gunfire erupts. One of the men nearly overpowers her, but Eunseong intervenes just in time, taking him out. Hana thanks him for his help, shaken but focused. As they wait for their next target, Eunseong updates her, it's moving quickly, and a heavy collision seems inevitable. Suddenly, Hana overhears a man inside the trailer on a phone call. He's talking about how he regrets ever entering this deal with Parenti and seems uninterested in the merchandise. Just then, a violent crash shakes the trailer, throwing Hana off balance. Eunseong's voice crackles through her earpiece, calling her name anxiously. Hana, dazed, finally opens her eyes, removes her earpiece, and steadies herself, gun in hand. A man approaches the trailer door, and she aims her gun at him, warning him to stop. Ignoring her, he steps forward, pressing her weapon to his forehead, almost daring her to pull the trigger, saying he's been longing for death. Before she can react, he strikes her hard, and she loses consciousness. As she falls, he picks her up, muttering with dark intent that he'll bring her with them to see if she's of any use. Hana jolts awake, realizing her hands are tightly bound. Panic floods her, and she immediately begins to struggle. The man who had brought her in notices her movements and says, "You have quick reflexes." She looks up, her eyes widening as she recognizes him, it's Giulio Parenti. With a mix of fear and curiosity, Giulio asks who she is and if she had been waiting for him in the trailer. Hana admits she was, but instead of explaining, she slyly suggests he take off his clothes, hinting that she can't leave the bathroom in her filthy state. Irritated, he grabs her chin, asking if she's trying to flirt and questioning whether she expects to leave alive. Unfazed, Hana responds, hinting that he might need her help sooner than he thinks. In response, Giulio roughly pushes his fingers into her mouth, warning her that if she wants trouble, she should get used to this. He steps closer, invading her space. Suddenly, another man barges in, demanding to know why Giulio hasn't killed her yet. Giulio tries to explain, saying he was going to kill her since she admitted she'd come to kill him, but she kept making advances, and things escalated. The man looks skeptical but softens under Giulio's sharp glare. Meanwhile, Hana, picking up only pieces of their Italian conversation, senses a chance. As they argue, Hana discreetly cuts through her restraints. The second man pulls out a gun, determined to finish the job, but as he moves toward her, she quickly overpowers him, grabs the gun, and pulls the rope around his neck tight, warning Giulio not to approach. She declares that she came here to face him, and nothing will stop her mission. Giulio, seeing her determination, raises his hands in surrender, asking what she wants. Hana reveals she needs his help to find an imposter who's been posing as him. Tightening the rope slightly, she forces the other man to scream. Giulio, realizing he has no choice, agrees to cooperate, asking what she wants from him. Hana's response is clear: she wants his help to find the imposter, and in return, she'll bring the impersonator to justice. The police arrive at the crash site, and one officer approaches Eunseong, asking what should be done with the bodies found there. Eunseong slips him some money and tells him to handle it as he sees fit, adding that these people were just a gang of criminals and the police can take credit for catching them. Meanwhile, Parenti and his gang have taken off with both the weapons box and the trailer of cocaine. Eunseong's final task here is to erase a phone belonging to one of the dead. As he crouches down to do this, Taejun unexpectedly appears. Eunseong acknowledges him, noting it's been a while since Taejun got roughed up by Hana. Calmly, he draws a gun and questions why Taejun never mentioned that Hana and Dewey are twins. Taejun replies that he didn't think it was relevant. Eunseong, cocking the gun and keeping his aim steady, insists he needs information about Hana. So, Taejun explains that Sergeant Hana is now just an ordinary civilian. With her brother Dewey as her only family, she couldn't abandon him, which is why she's come this far. But Eunseong says that decision isn't hers to make. Still aiming at Taejun, Eunseong warns him to start being useful if he wants to stay safe. Lowering his weapon and walking away, Eunseong hears Taejun's question: "Are you interested in Hana?" Eunseong replies, "The sergeant is quite intriguing. It's making me reconsider my plans." Back at Giulio Parenti's hideout, he asks Hana once more about her goal of capturing the imposter pretending to be him. He remarks that it might be too late, since the people from Mesa were killed by a sniper. Frustrated, Hana complains that she never got the chance to question them. She reveals that her brother has been tracking the imposter, and by working together, they can discover who's really behind all this. She mentions a rumor that Giulio ordered a hit on a Korean intelligence agent, her brother. Shocked, Giulio asks if that means her brother is dead. Hana firmly insists that he's alive, which is why she's here with Giulio, to make sure he's not behind her brother's death. She realizes that earning Giulio's trust is key to completing her mission. To show goodwill, Giulio quickly unbuttons his shirt and hands it to her. He then tells one of his men, Romano, to bring Hana a glass of wine in exchange for letting Lorenzo go. Though wary of drinking anything they offer, Giulio persuades her, reminding her that she must be thirsty. Despite her dry throat, she's suspicious, wondering if the drink might be poisoned or drugged. Taking a chance, she kicks Lorenzo aside, grabs the glass from Romano, and locks eyes with Giulio as she drinks. Almost immediately, dizziness hits, and she collapses to the ground. It becomes clear they've already arranged medical help for her. Giulio orders his men to make sure she gets full treatment, leaving nothing to chance. Hana is caught in a haunting nightmare, reliving a moment when a man vowed revenge against her. She jerks awake, shaken by how real it felt. Disoriented, she realizes her wounds have been treated, and it dawns on her that she must have been given a sedative. "What a nightmare," she murmurs, wishing she could erase the memory entirely. In her mind, she revisits her time as a Valentine's Day agent. A man she put behind bars had lost his entire family, killed by enemies during the 7 months he was imprisoned. He had cursed her, vowing revenge. At first, she brushed off his threats, but as time passed, her unease grew. She began checking on her brother daily, making sure he was safe. Eventually, she heard that the man had been killed in a revenge scheme, and for the first time, she felt relieved to learn of someone's death, a moment that forever marred her sense of dignity. Now, the nightmare has brought it all back. Determined to keep her brother safe, Hana decides to stay focused. But first, she needs food before she can form a plan to persuade Parenti. Rising from the bed, she considers her situation. She knew Parenti would be a difficult opponent, but his level of instability has surprised her. She's baffled about why he's kept her alive, as he doesn't seem ready to accept her offer. As she opens the door, she unexpectedly bumps into Lorenzo, the man she'd tied up before. Apologizing for their earlier encounter, she tries to strike up a conversation, hoping to learn more about Parenti. But Lorenzo, unamused, orders her back to her room and warns her not to try anything. Hana reassures him, saying she'll be the model hostage, and pleads for something to eat, admitting she hasn't eaten all day. After a moment, Lorenzo reluctantly agrees, though he warns that their food supplies are low. He lets her follow him, but not before secretly activating a microphone to let Parenti eavesdrop on their conversation. As they walk, Lorenzo asks if she's an assassin or perhaps a North Korean spy. Hana denies it, explaining that she's a former member of the South Korean Special Forces but is now just a baeksu, a Korean term for an unemployed person. On the other end, Parenti listens intently, lighting a cigarette as he follows their conversation. Just then, heavy rain begins to pour, and several cars arrive, signaling the arrival of new players in this unfolding drama. Lorenzo kindly invites Hana to share a meal with him. Surprised and curious, she can't help but ask if he was ever a chef, but he smiles and explains that cooking is just a beloved hobby of his. Teasingly, he warns her that he'll take the food away if she doesn't dig in. Hana finally gives in and admits the food is incredible, a far cry from what she expected from someone she thought was a hardened, gun-toting mobster. Their conversation shifts as Hana brings up someone named Sei, noting the name sounds Korean. Intrigued, she asks if this person might be part of the mafia or perhaps Giulio Parenti's lover. Lorenzo, amused, explains that Sei is a colleague and warns her never to mention the name in front of Giulio, as it might provoke him. She then turns the topic to her missing brother, asking if Lorenzo knows anything about him. He flips the question back on her but adds a grim note: Giulio Parenti doesn't keep hostages, he hates the hassle and would rather dispose of them. Concerned, Hana asks if Giulio plans to deal with the imposter posing as him. Lorenzo sighs, remarking that imposters are as common as street rats in their line of work. This exchange leaves Hana suspicious that Giulio may not truly care about the imposters and might be feigning cooperation for his own purposes. Knowing the intelligence service believes her brother betrayed them, she resolves to stay longer and find proof to clear his name. Leaning back in her chair, she wonders what schemes Giulio might be plotting. As they head back, Lorenzo's curiosity gets the better of him, and he asks Hana if she's with the FBI. Her response makes him momentarily regret asking, but she assures him she doesn't mind being questioned. Their light-hearted exchange is interrupted by Giulio, who arrives unexpectedly. He jokes about how close they seem, suggesting they might be on a date. Lorenzo, quick to deflect, reminds Giulio of Hana's earlier attempt to kill him and quips that she's not his type, he prefers caviar blondes. Hana fires back, claiming Lorenzo isn't her type either. Giulio, ever observant, points out that she's still wearing his shirt and tells her to change into something more appropriate because they're heading to a funeral. The rain pours steadily as they prepare to leave, umbrellas in hand. They attend the funeral of a fallen colleague, whose body was recently recovered in Cambodia. Together, they place flowers and bid their final farewells as the hearse carries the casket away. Emotions run high among the mourners, some weep openly, while others struggle to hold back tears. During a quiet moment, Hana recites a prayer in Korean. Giulio, intrigued, asks about the language, and she explains it's a traditional funeral prayer, wishing for the deceased to find happiness and freedom from death. After the service and as the rain eases, they gather for a meal. Hana's mind returns to her primary goal, keeping Giulio Parenti's attention. She carefully brings up his suspicions about her, encouraging him to ask whatever he wants. Giulio meets her gaze and asks what exactly she wants from him. Her mind races, but she calmly admits she has many desires. Giulio, amused, asks her to narrow it down to 3. Hana, with a playful smirk, asks if he'll grant them. Giulio, intrigued, replies that it depends on what she's asking for. Hana begins with her first request, help finding her brother, Duty. Her second is to track down whoever targeted him. For her third, she cheekily asks for her own plate of food. Giulio, momentarily caught off guard, questions whether the earlier meal wasn't enough for her. Without missing a beat, he orders everyone else to leave, ensuring they have privacy to continue their conversation. Giulio Parenti leans in closer, his voice a quiet blend of curiosity and amusement. "The more I think about it," he begins, "the more absurd it seems how little I actually know about you." His tone sharpens as he admits that, despite having a top-tier intelligence officer at his disposal, they've been unable to uncover anything about her. "It's as if you're a ghost," he remarks with a wry grin. That grin soon fades as he grows serious, a glint of danger flashing in his eyes. "Taming insolent and dangerous creatures like you is my specialty," he declares. To emphasize his point, his hand clamps firmly around her neck, his touch cold and deliberate. The gesture sends a jolt of fear through Hana, a stark reminder of just how unhinged Giulio truly is. Swallowing her unease, Hana musters the courage to ask, "Do you get rid of these creatures once they're tamed? Without mercy?" Giulio's gaze darkens, his eyes narrowing as he considers her question. The pause is heavy with tension, and she can almost see the cruel fates he envisions for those who dare fake submission. "Only those who pretend," he finally responds, his voice laced with quiet menace. Hana begins to grasp the brutal logic that governs him, but the unrelenting grip on her neck continues to unsettle her. Then, his tone shifts again, this time colder. "Your bag," he states, "was found near the crash site." His eyes bore into hers as he delivers the next blow. "Inside was a video of you, Gavin Smith, and your brother. Captured shortly before the explosion." The mention of Gavin Smith sends a chill through her. Giulio raises an eyebrow, waiting. "What's your connection to him?" he demands. The question lands heavily, laden with implications that fill Hana with dread. Her mind races, replaying those moments. Suddenly, a detail she'd missed clicks into place, a man with a limp trailing Dewey. Her brother had been carrying the explosive device, but now she's certain the limping man was an informant for their enemies. The truth strikes her like a thunderclap. The man following Dewey in the video was Gavin Smith. Giulio leans back slightly, his voice measured as he delves into Gavin Smith's past. He recounts the former FBI agent's reputation as one of their best, a man who once brought the Red Mafia to its knees, throwing New York City into turmoil. Their own paths had collided in that chaos, with Smith plotting Giulio's downfall before disappearing from the Bureau's radar. Now, against all odds, Smith has resurfaced, this time alongside Hana's brother. Hana's relentless questions about Smith's motives earn only a sardonic smirk from Giulio. He confesses his paranoia, the weight of constant betrayal leaving him unable to trust anyone, even God. Yet, he can't deny the strange fact that her brother has somehow allied himself with a man devoted to Giulio's destruction. His trust in Hana remains precarious, and he warns her, Dewey is likely with Smith right now. Desperate, Hana argues that Smith was protecting her brother, who was clearly in peril. Her conviction intensifies as she snatches a knife from the table. Without hesitation, she draws it across Giulio's neck, not deep enough to cause serious harm, but enough to make her point. Her voice is firm as she declares that, like Giulio, she values family above all else. She vows to protect her brother at any cost, dismissing the whispers of Dewey's alleged loyalty to the FBI. Giulio, unbothered by the cut, regards her with renewed interest. His gaze sharpens as he demands answers, questioning why he should place any trust in her, a woman cloaked in mystery. After a tense pause, Hana concedes, offering him a glimpse of her true identity. She reveals her name, Hana Lee, a mercenary working for an organization called Valentine's Day. She also shares her codename, One, though she doubts Giulio recognizes its weight. As she speaks, Giulio's curiosity deepens with a dangerous gleam in his eyes. The air between them grows electric as he reaches for her hand, pulling her closer. Without warning, he presses his lips to hers in a fierce, passionate kiss that leaves her shaken. But the moment twists when Hana, regaining her composure, brandishes the knife again. This time, she drives it into Giulio's side. His reaction is unexpected, a daring challenge for her to press the blade further. His voice drops to a chilling murmur as he admits something disturbing. He may be developing a sinful obsession with her. Hana shoves him away, her actions making it clear she's not here to kill him. Shortly after, she's restrained and placed in handcuffs. Letting out a tired sigh, she asks if he plans on removing them. His response is cautious but firm. He's sure she could free herself if she wanted, but keeping them on is in her best interest. As the doctor stitches a knife wound nearby, Giulio leans closer to Hana, warning her that learning his plans won't help if she decides to run. She silently wonders where she went wrong. She had pegged Giulio as just another mobster, easy to manipulate into seeking revenge despite the risks. But now, it's clear she underestimated him. She shifts the conversation, asking about Gavin Smith's whereabouts. Giulio assures her he could find him if he wanted. When she presses further, questioning why Smith wants him deceased, Giulio casually scratches his neck and admits, Iuna lived his younger brother. Hana feels a surge of emotion but reminds herself not to let Giulio rattle her, he's testing her. When she asks about her release, he says it'll happen when he trusts her. Until then, she's his prisoner, and he emphasizes that he can dispose of her if necessary. Lost in thought, Hana realizes she can't just sit around. If the guards watching her are unarmed, maybe she could take them down and escape through a window. But her planning is cut short by the cold press of a gun against her head. A voice warns her to abandon any escape ideas and return to her room. The voice promises respect, but only if she behaves. Giulio rummages through Hana's belongings, his fingers pausing on her driver's license. He studies her name for a moment before commenting that he's heard of her, a legendary agent. The first time he saw her, with blood streaked across her face and madness in her eyes, he genuinely thought she was death incarnate, sent to end him. And, strangely, he recalls feeling a sense of release in that moment, as though a part of him wanted her to pull the trigger. Moments later, Romano enters the office with a detailed report. Giulio instructs him to track down Logan Valentine's contact information. When Romano asks why, Giulio explains that Hana Lee used to work under Valentine. With a cold determination, Giulio adds that they have many people to find, and even more to eliminate. Meanwhile, Hana remains locked in the bedroom, her frustration mounting as her shouts for help go unanswered. A full day has passed, and her growing discomfort from needing the bathroom only worsens her anxiety. Just as she debates her next move, the door creaks open, revealing Giulio with a smirk. He steps inside, casually observing her. "You seem to be holding up," he remarks, ignoring her disheveled state. Hana, exasperated but determined, assures him she has no plans to run and pleads for him to take off the cuffs, stressing her urgent need for the bathroom. Giulio's expression hardens, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that makes her uneasy. Leaning in close, he murmurs, "You're driving me insane." Then, his hands move toward her, his actions crossing a boundary with unsettling deliberation. Hana couldn't be trusted, so her hands were quickly cuffed behind her back. Emerging from the bathroom, she demanded Giulio's help with her pants, reminding him that he'd been the one to remove them and should now assist her in putting them back on. Giulio raises an eyebrow and asks if she washed her hands. The cuffs made that impossible, but he insists there's a simple solution. Standing before her, he gently helps her wash them himself. Hana can only marvel at the strange turn of events. Then Giulio pushes further, teasingly asking if there are larger areas of her body that needs washing. Hana flinches and snaps at him to control his blatant horniness, firmly stating that no amount of charm will convince her to get intimate, her life was too precious to risk. Giulio counters, saying he should be the one worried, given she'd tried to stab him during a kiss. Hana, defensive, reminds him that he strangled her first, showing the scars on her body as proof. The tension thickens between them until Hana abruptly stands and storms out of the room. With a sudden, aggressive move, Giulio lunges and pins Hana onto the bed. Smirking, he teases her, hinting at a surprise if she plays along. Before she can respond, he pulls out a phone. Hana's eyes lock on it, her mind racing with the possibility that it might hold a message from her brother. Her instincts take over, and she lunges for the phone, but Giulio is faster. He slips it back into his pocket, his tone casual yet firm as he advises her to stay cooperative. Frustrated but determined, Hana considers her options, eventually deciding to play his game. She leans in, kissing and caressing him with calculated intent. For a moment, Giulio stands motionless, as if weighing her actions. Then, with a faint smile, he steps back and orders her to get dressed. "We have guests downstairs," he says, tossing the key to her handcuffs across the room. "They might just hold the key to your freedom." She begs him for just a moment to check her phone, eager to see the text message. Giulio responds with a teasing scold, reminding her she should be grateful he even gave her phone back and playfully asking if she wants him to take it away again. As they walk down the stairs together, Hana voices her concern about how they look, worried that others might get the wrong idea. Her fears prove true when they run into acquaintances who jokingly ask why she's so close to Giulio. With a smirk, Hana quips that she's his captive, and he counters with a grin, saying letting her wander freely would be too dangerous for his men. Hana shifts her focus to Logan, questioning why all three of them are gathered here. Logan explains that Mr. Giulio Parenti had contacted them the previous day and admits his concern for her safety. In response, Hana proudly recounts how she put up a fierce fight, even managing to stab Giulio Parenti in the shoulder with a knife. Giulio, ready to cut through the small talk, gets straight to the point. He asks if Hana Lee is the agent once known as one. Logan confirms that she used the alias in the past but reassures him that she's no longer connected to the FBI. With that clarified, Giulio decides Hana needs protection and assigns the task to Valentine's Day. Before anyone can act, Eunseong steps forward to volunteer. However, Hana objects fiercely, snatching Giulio's drink from his hand and reminding him that this is her fight, not something to drag others into. Giulio, unfazed, tries to take a sip from the glass now in her hand, only to have it shatter on the floor. Amused but firm, he concludes that assigning her a guard isn't worth the risk, even mobsters value their lives too much for that. Shifting his attention to Eunseong, Giulio asks his name, confirms his recruitment, and pours him a drink with a sly grin. He watches closely as Eunseong downs it without hesitation. Hana feels a wave of relief as the cuffs are finally removed from her wrists and her belongings returned. She recalls Giulio's warning to obey her guard if she wants to avoid being restrained again, and irritation flares as she finds him infuriatingly patronizing. Determined to stay calm, she inspects the phone he gave her, hoping for a message from her brother. Instead, she's met with a strange photo of her brother's feet, as if he'd accidentally captured the floor beneath him. Intrigued, she sketches the pattern from the image onto paper and quickly realizes the floor's design is anything but ordinary. As she studies the sketch, Eunseong enters the room and glances at her phone. Casually, he remarks that the image must be connected to Moon Shipping Company. Confused, Hana presses him for details, wondering how he could identify a company from a simple floor design. Eunseong clarifies that he wasn't focused on the floor but the logo visible in the photo. If the image is genuine, it suggests her brother might currently be trapped on a ship owned by Moon Shipping, a company controlled by Mujin Kong. Eunseong lifts her chin gently, observing her with quiet curiosity. He comments that she seems to have escaped a dangerous situation, admitting he wasn't sure she would after catching Parenti's attention. When she appears confused, he elaborates, explaining that people like her tend to provoke strong reactions from the Mafia. He goes on to describe Giulio, the eldest son of the Parenti family, once a member of the GIS, now running his operations from a mansion in Sicily. His business focuses solely on legally manufactured drugs for medical purposes, yet he has an unusual sensitivity to women with black hair, a trait tied to his mother and his hatred for the Red Mafia. To complicate matters, the Asian woman married to the Red Mafia boss happens to be Giulio's former lover. Hana, curious, asks if Giulio's ex-lover is Sei Jang. Eunseong confirms, noting Hana's uncanny resemblance to her. The name sparks Hana's memory of Lorenzo's stern warning: she must never mention Sei Jang in Giulio's presence. The Mafia's veiled threats still linger in her mind. Eunseong goes on to explain that Parenti has been invited to a party aboard one of Moon Shipping's opulent yachts, likely hosted by its CEO, Mujin Kong. Alarmed, Hana hurries to the pool area to find Parenti and confirm the invitation's authenticity. She pleads with him to take her along, revealing her suspicion that her brother, Dewey, is after Mujin Kong. While Dewey's motives are likely layered, she's certain one of them is tied to Kong impersonating Giulio. She confronts the mafia boss, demanding to know why he hadn't told her he already knew the identity of the impersonator. He then questions why she should expect him to report anything to her. In Korean, her frustration builds as she realizes he had kept this from her. She wonders how long he had intended to deceive her and if this was some form of revenge for her past betrayal when she stabbed him. Giulio, unfazed, responds in Italian, suggesting she speaks English. Undeterred, Hana continues in Korean, challenging his authority and telling him to stop speaking Italian as well. Giulio tells her she's getting too worked up, but Hana doesn't back down. She grabs him, her voice filled with threat as she warns that if that person harms her brother in any way, she'll take revenge, starting with the Italian mafia. She accuses him of being the one who dragged her brother into this mess. In a burst of frustration, she shoves him into the pool, ordering him to get out of her sight. But instead of falling back, Giulio quickly grabs her hand, and the two tumble into the water together. Underwater, Giulio gently caresses Hana and kisses her, leaving her confused. She wonders why he keeps acting this way and if he's taking out frustrations from his past relationship on her. But then, she feels her hand go limp and the ripples around them spread. Giulio quickly pulls her out of the water, and she opens her eyes. She asks why he looks so upset, and he responds sharply that she crossed the line. Hana, unfazed, tells him he should get checked out at a hospital, suggesting he's confusing her with someone else. Just then, Eunseong rushes in, calling her name and kneeling beside her. He's shocked she ran off after telling him she was going to change. When she asks if he was looking for her, he admits with a hint of a smile that he missed her. Giulio, however, shifts the focus back to the situation, wrapping his arm around her and asking if she really wants to attend the party. If so, he suggests she go as his date, a move that would allow her the freedom to do what she needs. He reassures her that few would be foolish enough to mess with his woman. Excited, Hana asks if this means she'll come with him, and Giulio confirms, adding that he's suddenly feeling a bit under the weather and would appreciate her help since he's doing her a favor. Surprised, Hana asks if Giulio is really feeling sick. She can hardly believe that someone like him could fall ill. Meanwhile, Eunseong, sensing the tension between them, quietly gets up and leaves. Giulio informs Hana that they'll be leaving tomorrow, so she should be ready. When she asks where they're headed, he answers that, if he remembers correctly, she plans to attend a party. He adds, with a smirk, that he hopes she's not planning to show up looking like that. The next scene shifts to the mafia boss taking Hana shopping for the party. She picks out a skirt and top, deciding they'll do for the event. However, selecting clothes is easy for her. What she really needs is something that can conceal her weapons while giving her quick access to them. Giulio appears behind her, whispering that she'd be better off going naked to the party. She fires back, joking that he must know she has a pretty banging body, so she'll look amazing in anything. She also grabs a pair of heels, but Giulio is eager to leave. Though she protests that she's not done shopping, he firmly tells her not to even think about wearing the items she just picked. Hana smirks and informs him that no matter what she wears, it'll automatically look luxurious. Suddenly, Hana bolts from her seat and suggests they grab coffee together. Parenti agrees, but only if it's espresso. Once inside the coffee shop, he tells her that while this may seem lighthearted, she should be honest with him about what she wants. Hana senses that he's being unusually easy on her at the moment, so she decides to take advantage of the opportunity. She needs him. Giulio points out that she doesn't seem scared of him. "Why would I be scared of you?" she replies, asking if he doesn't know what an orphanage is. His question about whether her parents passed away when she was young prompts her to reveal a painful truth. She never had parents. She and her brother were born in a motel, and the woman who gave birth to them couldn't bring herself to kill them, so she just abandoned them there and ran off. Since then, Her twin brother has always been the most precious person in her life. Giulio, contemplating her words, reflects that it's a stark contrast to his own siblings, who are constantly looking for opportunities to betray each other. Suddenly, he stands up and announces that everything is ready, her clothes, shoes, accessories, and everything she'll need are prepared and waiting for her back at the villa. Confused, Hana asks what they've been doing this whole time. He smirks and clarifies that he never said they were going shopping. He only asked if she planned on showing up to the party looking a mess. Hana hisses in frustration, asking why he's been silently following her around this whole time. He casually explains that it was amusing and that he wanted some fresh air. Looking at her with a smirk, he adds that it also seemed like she was enjoying herself. Eunseong Yoo is on the phone, listening intently as the caller asks about his current situation. While speaking, he discreetly rifles through Hana's bag, reflecting on how the operation he set in motion has become far more complicated than he anticipated. He also confides in the caller about a colleague's reckless behavior, particularly mentioning the audacious use of Giulio Parenti's name. Eunseong assures the caller he will return the call soon, as he needs to investigate further. As he ponders, a question nags at him. Did Hana take the flip phone with her? It seemed like she was using it to track her brother's movements. Just as he's lost in thought, Hana enters the room, her eyes narrowing as she observes him. She wonders aloud if he's been waiting alone for the room's occupant to return or if he has ulterior motives. Eunseong gently strokes her hair, assuring her that he was simply waiting for her and nothing more. His curiosity piqued, he asks about her recent interaction with the mafia boss, clearly gauging her level of interest. Hana, caught off guard, asks if Parenti is his target and if that's why he volunteered to be her bodyguard. Eunseong downplays it, expressing his concern for her well-being and her tendency to rush into dangerous situations. He reminds her of his romantic interest in her, offering an alliance. He suggests she consider working with him, a fellow mercenary, rather than aligning herself with the dangerous mafia. Hana challenges Eunseong's argument, questioning whether mercenaries are any better than the mafia, given that they, too, resort to violence, theft, and betrayal. Eunseong counters by asserting that at least mercenaries don't treat people like trophies. He dismisses Parenti as a dilettante and a counterfeit, predicting that once Parenti gains control, he'll discard her without hesitation. Hana, sharing the grim truth of her brother's betrayal by his own agency and the lack of efforts to rescue him, wonders aloud who she can turn to for help. A hint of suspicion crosses her mind as she comments on Eunseong's extensive knowledge, which unsettles her. To test him further, she asks if he knows Mujin Kong. Eunseong cryptically replies that he does, but demands something in return. Hana, unwavering, moves closer to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. She warns him that she might save his life once, but sternly reminds him not to snoop through her things again, stressing that she doesn't trust him. In another scene, a tense dinner unfolds with Giulio, filled with an awkward silence. Hana finally breaks the ice with a bold question, asking if he has poisoned their food. Giulio, unfazed, challenges her to taste it and find out. Seizing the moment, Eunseong presses Giulio for the reason behind their gathering, sensing there's a purpose behind their presence. After a pause, Giulio reveals that their current activities are coming to an end and hints at their next destination, Macau. Hana leaps to her feet, shouting that they are not going anywhere. She demands to know if Giulio Parenti has forgotten why she came to Cambodia in the first place. Giulio remains calm, explaining that a cruise ship has already left Cambodia and is headed for Macau, where the party he was invited to is taking place. Hana sighs in frustration, realizing she hadn't considered that he might leave the country. Giulio then shares that after handling his business in Macau, he plans to return to Italy and won't be coming back to Cambodia. He hints that this could be their last dinner together. With a resigned expression, he raises his glass for a toast. In the next scene, the screech of a car's tires cuts through the night as it speeds toward its destination. Hana steps out and heads toward a building, prompting Eunseong to ask if she'll be all right on her own and whether she needs him to accompany her. She reassures him that she'll be fine and that it shouldn't take long. Giving him a quick look, she adds that if she's not back in 10 minutes, he should probably come find her, and the same goes for Lorenzo. Before leaving Cambodia, Hana wants to take stock of everything that has happened. The fact that her brother, Dui, has managed to hide himself so completely suggests he must have help. She suspects they might have teamed up for an undercover investigation involving Giulio Parenti and Mujin Kong. There's one last place she needs to check, Taijun's house. Hana quietly sneaks up on him just as he finishes a phone call. Startled, he quickly asks how long she's been standing there, but she counters by asking if he's trying to run away. In a split second, he reaches for his gun, but to his surprise, Hana already has it in her hand. With the gun pointed at him, she questions why he's so jumpy, acting like he's done something wrong when, in fact, she's the one who should feel guilty. She reminds him that she stabbed him in the back years ago, but he dismisses it, saying he can't blame her for her actions, given she thought her brother was still alive. He urges her to put the gun down so they can talk. Hana cuts him off, demanding to know how long he plans to keep lying to her. She declares that her brother never had anything to do with Parenti, and what he said about mobsters assassinating him is pure nonsense. He challenges her, asking how she knows that, but she calmly reveals the truth. She knows the real imposter is Mujin Kong, the CEO of Mun Shipping Company. Hana makes it clear that this is his last chance to come clean, stepping closer and aiming the gun at his head. She accuses him of being the one who betrayed Dui. He scratches his neck nervously, still denying it and insisting that Dui was the one who betrayed them. Hana observes his tell. He scratches his neck when he lies, and she calls him out on it. With a cold, unwavering stare, she warns him that if he doesn't come clean now, she won't hesitate to assassinate him next time. The message is clear: if he decides to run, he'd better do it fast, because she won't let him escape again. The sound of a gunshot echoes through the building, prompting the neighbors who had heard it to rush into Taijun's apartment to investigate. As they burst through the door, they make a failed attempt to grab Hana, but her attention is elsewhere, her eyes locked on Taijun as he makes a swift escape. Meanwhile, outside, Lorenzo and Eunseong anxiously wait, their minds racing with worry. They're left in suspense, uncertain whether Hana has just murdered someone. Eunseong and Lorenzo rush into the apartment, only to be met with the sight of Hana sitting calmly on the floor, surrounded by the bodies of the men she's just killed. She looks up at them and, with a dry tone, tells them they're late. Meanwhile, Giulio is on the phone, listening intently as the caller updates him on their investigation into Mujin Kong. The caller explains that despite their efforts, they've come up with very little information about Kong, with even the smallest photos being tightly guarded. Strangely, Mujin wasn't even in line for succession until a few years ago when his half-brother, Muho Kong, stepped down. The caller also notes that Giulio has picked up an unusual ally in Hana Lee, referring to her as the Valentine's Day mercenary. He warns Giulio to be cautious, reminding him of Hana's violent history, mentioning that she put Cyril in the hospital for a month and nearly assassinated Carlo. Giulio, unfazed, reassures the caller that he and Hana are aligned now, both working toward the same goal. As the caller continues to escalate the conversation, Giulio cuts him off, ending the call with a final, firm click. Lorenzo rushes Hana back to their place, shouting for a doctor even though she insists that the wound is nothing more than a graze. Inwardly, Hana reflects on her growing suspicions, realizing that she couldn't leave Cambodia without confirming certain things for herself. She still struggles to accept that Taijun might have actually betrayed her brother, Dui. She had planned to give him the benefit of the doubt, but when he ran, any trust she had left quickly dissolved. Moments later, Giulio enters with a first aid kit, shutting the door behind him. He reminds her of the hour she requested, then questions if returning in such a bloody state was part of her plan. As he opens the kit, he pulls out an antibiotic and prepares to administer it to her. He warns her that after this, he'll apply a local anesthetic, ensuring she doesn't walk around with traces of others on her. He adds, with a hint of irritation, that he'd be even more upset if she returned covered in dead men's blood. Hana, quietly contemplating, wonders if there's a way to use this moment to tempt him, even just a little. As Giulio finishes treating her cuts, he rises from his seat and unexpectedly shoves his finger into her mouth. He coldly tells her that he's going to help her find her brother in Macau, but once she finds him, she should go straight back to Korea. Hana, reflecting on the situation, realizes that with Taejun's betrayal now confirmed, Parenti is the only asset she has left. He is the one man who has consistently hurt her yet also cannot stand to see her suffer. Suddenly, the chair creaks beneath her, and as she loses her balance, her hand instinctively reaches out to grab hold of him. This unexpected contact sparks a passionate kiss between them. Giulio hoists her onto the bed, their kiss deepening as they both become consumed by the moment. As their lips meet, Hana's thoughts shift to the future. She knows she will have to leverage Giulio even more than before, using him as her tool to secure her brother's safety. But there's a lingering question in her mind: is he a lifeline, or just a tattered rope leading her further into ruin? Taejun rushes to his desk, frantically shoving his belongings into a bag, desperate to make a quick escape. He can't fathom how anyone could have bypassed the supposedly impenetrable security system without triggering an alarm. The sound of approaching footsteps jolts him, and he quickly grabs a hidden firearm. The intruder steps closer, warning Taejun not to run, adding that it would only make things worse. Taejun's heart pounds as he turns slowly, and to his shock, he recognizes the man. It's Giulio Parenti. Giulio calmly pulls a gun from his pocket and points it at Taejun, accusing him of impersonating him. Stunned, Taejun denies it, but the mafia boss counters, saying the evidence clearly implicates him. Beads of sweat gather on Taejun's forehead as he insists he knows the real culprit and begs for a chance to explain. Giulio, however, cuts him off and fires a warning shot near Taejun's leg, coldly blaming it on his bad mood. At the villa, Hana wakes up to find Eunseong sitting beside her bed. Annoyed, she scolds him for barging in without notice, but he defends himself, explaining he was worried she might feel pain once the anesthesia wore off. With a calm smile, he reminds her of his duty as her bodyguard and his responsibility to keep her safe. As he inspects her injury, he asks if that is where she got hurt. Hana assures him that Parenti already treated her, complimenting his skills. Eunseong agrees, praising Parenti's expertise and noting that they didn't even need a doctor. Their conversation pauses when Hana mentions she's thirsty, leading to an awkward silence. They exchange a brief, lingering look before Eunseong softly asks if the mafia boss might have feelings for her. Hana snaps back, "What was that?" flustered by the question. Breaking the tension, Eunseong hands her a glass of water and delivers a message from Logan, who called while she was asleep. Logan informs her that Mujin Kang will have a bodyguard at the Valentine's Day party. Then, Hana immediately remembers Logan mentioning earlier that Mujin Kang was why he came to the area in the first place. Eunseong adds that all she needs to do at the party is find a man named Oslo, who will be standing next to Mujin Kang. Presently, in Macau, Giulio and Hana are getting ready for the party. Hana sits in a vanity, fixing her appearance, when Giulio enters the room. He leans down, pressing gentle kisses to her shoulders, but she frowns slightly and accuses him of crossing a line. Feigning innocence, Giulio asks, "What did I do?" before smiling and asking if she's ready. Angrily, Hana snaps, asking why she wouldn't be ready, then questions if they really have to share the same room. She points out that it doesn't seem like a good idea. Giulio calmly replies that they have to because she's pretending to be his partner, and people will be watching closely. Frustrated, she shrugs his hand off her shoulder and asks him to help zip up her dress. As Giulio obliges, he kisses her back, prompting her to immediately remind him they don't have time for distractions, they have a party to attend. He smirks, admitting he's not particularly eager to go, but if they must, he wants her to look captivating enough to draw everyone's attention. Hana rolls her eyes and asks if all this is really necessary, and he assures her that it is, explaining that in games like these, the person who believes they hold the upper hand is always the first to act. Startled, Hana asks if he's implying that Mujin Kang will come looking for her. Giulio nods with a sly smile. Giulio leans in to kiss Hana, pulling her from her thoughts. She notes how much more physical he's become with her since that night, as though he no longer feels the need to assess or test her. Wondering if she should play along, she decides it might not be the worst strategy for now. If he keeps acting like this, he might eventually let his guard down. A sudden knock at the door interrupts them. Hana looks surprised, but Giulio calmly assures her it must be her equipment. He retrieves a box from the door and hands it to her. When she opens it, Hana confirms the contents are top-notch. Inside, there's a bracelet laced with sedatives, a necklace concealing a small bomb, and even hairpins designed for stabbing. She tries them on and asks Giulio for his opinion. He compliments her, noting how striking she looks. Hana shifts the conversation, asking about the cruise ship they're supposed to board. She mentions seeing it docked earlier, but Giulio explains that the ship is just a display, a fake vessel for tonight's pre-party. Offering his hand in a gentlemanly gesture, he helps her to her feet, and they prepare to leave. As they step outside, fireworks light up the sky, and the sheer scale of the event becomes apparent. Hana takes in the crowd and realizes this is where her brother is, or at least, where he's waiting for her. Even if he isn't on this boat tonight, she believes he'll be on the cruise ship tomorrow. As they enter the party, Hana is struck by how extravagant it is. The number of people and their curious stares make it difficult for her to keep her composure. Giulio notices her discomfort and teasingly tells her they're staring because she looks stunning when she's aroused. Hana immediately denies being aroused, but Giulio smirks, asking why her ears and cheeks are so enticingly flushed. Before she can respond, someone calls out Giulio's name, exclaiming that it's been a while. Hana recognizes the woman before her as Sei Jiang, the wife of a notorious Red Mafia mobster and Giulio Parenti's former lover. Standing beside her is Yuri Petrov, a high-ranking member of the Red Mafia and the CFO of the Petrov Corporation. As Sei greets Hana warmly and even calls her one, she grows suspicious. How does this woman know her? Her unease deepens when Giulio pulls her closer, prompting Sei to lean in and whisper her hopes that Giulio isn't simply trying to please his ex. He responds coolly, "Is that what it looks like?" Amid this charged exchange, Hana spots a familiar figure, Cyril Kuzmin. She hadn't expected to see him here, especially after their last encounter, which ended with him hospitalized years ago. It momentarily slips her mind that he is Petrov's right-hand man. Sei, ever perceptive, asks if Hana is of Korean descent and compliments her beauty. Before the conversation can develop further, Giulio and Petrov excuse themselves for a private discussion. Giulio instructs Hana to stay put until his return, and though reluctant, she nods. Petrov also assigns Cyril to watch over Sei in his absence. With the men gone, Hana discreetly contacts Eunseong, who informs her he's been helping with a security sweep of the ship. Before she can probe further, Sei steps closer, her gaze piercing. She suggests moving indoors, pointing out the risks of remaining outside, where tall buildings could serve as cover for snipers. Sei casually mentions that the party organizers likely accounted for such threats. Hana, unsettled, listens as Sei drops another bombshell: Mujin Kang will not be attending the party tonight. Startled, Hana presses for details, but Sei only warns her not to trust anyone, no matter what they claim. Sei's revelations continue as she reveals that she designed the bracelet Hana is wearing. She explains its dual function: it holds sedatives but also a stimulant and antidote, activated by rotating the blue diamond 90 degrees. Sei confesses she never shared this feature with Giulio but is entrusting Hana with the knowledge because she likes her. Hana finds herself both wary and intrigued by Sei's enigmatic charm. She wonders if this captivating personality was what once drew Giulio to her. Intrigued, Hana asks Sei why she's sharing such critical information. Sei's answer is cryptic but revealing. She sees a reflection of her younger self in Hana. She advises Hana to trust her instincts and warns that the Mujin Kang who might appear tonight is likely an imposter. Hana's curiosity deepens, and she questions the real Mujin Kang's whereabouts. Sei speculates that he might be watching from the shadows, perhaps orchestrating his own death by sending a decoy. Before Hana can press further, the tension is shattered by the unmistakable presence of Gavin Smith. Acting quickly, she tells Sei to sit down and summon extra guards. Turning to Eunseong, she directs him to position himself at the opposite end of the venue and block all escape routes. To buy more time, she provides Eunseong with a fabricated description of their target, knowing it will keep him busy. As Hana begins her pursuit of Gavin Smith, she notices all the waitstaff, including Smith, are dressed in identical black bow ties, a detail she hopes will work in her favor. However, Smith seems to vanish into thin air as she closes in. Out of nowhere, a sudden blow sends her reeling. An unknown assailant looms over her, his voice dripping with malice as he declares, "You'll never understand how long I've waited for this moment." Startled by the sudden attack, Hana stares at Cyril Kuzmin, fear evident in her voice. "Don't you know today is a day of truce?" she pleads. Kuzmin's expression hardens, his voice cold and unyielding. "My only goal is to kill you." With ruthless determination, he slams her against the wall, his grip tightening around her neck. The malice in his eyes mirrors the torment he seeks to repay. Struggling for air, Hana whispers to herself, "What goes around, comes around." Her vision blurs as dizziness overtakes her, but a sudden memory surfaces, Giulio's promise to help her find her brother. Clinging to that thought, she realizes this cannot be the end. Summoning every ounce of strength, she strikes Kuzmin, forcing him to stagger back. Seizing the opportunity, she pulls out a concealed dagger and thrusts it into his hand, overpowering him. As Kuzmin collapses, defeated, Hana's thoughts turn to Giulio. Doubts and questions fill her mind, but she knows she must act quickly. She considers continuing her pursuit of Gavin Smith but pauses, wondering if Giulio might already be searching for her. Just then, her eyes land on a familiar figure, Oslo. With a plan forming, Hana heads toward him. To execute her scheme, she accidentally collides with a passing waiter, spilling drinks onto her dress. Oslo's companion offers her a handkerchief, his gesture polite and warm. As Oslo's gaze meets hers, recognition flickers in his eyes. The other man asks if she's Korean and introduces himself as the ship's owner. Seizing the moment, Hana lightly touches his chest, suggesting their meeting must be fate. She fabricates a story about a stranger accosting her and presses herself closer, asking if he could shelter her. Intrigued, the man agrees, offering to escort her away from the chaos. On the way, Hana feigns concern about imposing on him, but he reassures her, admitting he was bored with the party. He leads her to a private room on the second floor, mentioning its quiet seclusion. Hana recalls Sei's warnings to remain wary. Could this man be a decoy? If so, he might still hold valuable ties to the real Mujin Kong. Meanwhile, from the shadows, Gavin Smith watches Hana leave with the supposed Mujin Kong. In another part of the ship, a private room hosts three men deep in discussion. One seeks guidance from their boss, who instructs them to compile detailed profiles of all the waitstaff on board. Regarding Hana Lee, the boss decides, continue watching her. Things are about to get interesting. Hana quietly follows the man into the room, ignoring Oslo's whispered warning that it might not be safe. With unwavering determination, she assures him she knows exactly what she's doing. Still, Oslo hesitates, concern etched on his face as he watches her enter. Inside, the man uncorks a bottle of wine, setting out 2 crystal glasses, and offers Hana a robe to deal with the stain on her clothes. Her sharp eyes sweep the room, quickly spotting a surveillance camera hidden overhead. She suspects there's also a concealed listening device nearby. The man encourages her to relax, calling it the least he can do for a fellow compatriot. She takes the opportunity to shift the conversation, asking about the ship's ownership and coaxing him to reveal his name. He reluctantly admits he's Mujin Kong. Hana then weaves a fabricated story about her sister meeting a lover named Mujin Kong, hinting that he might be a womanizer. With a playful smirk, she mentions her attraction to bad boys, casually running her hand along his leg. While doing so, she discreetly checks him for weapons, confirming he's unarmed. Acting swiftly, she grabs him by the collar and flips him over, demanding his real identity. She warns him not to lie, insisting the guards outside are there to watch him, not protect him. She presses for the location of the true mastermind, but the man stammers, claiming he doesn't know. He reveals he once received a mysterious call from a Cambodian number. Without hesitation, Hana orders him to dial it immediately, convinced the real Mujin Kong is watching and will be forced to act. She fires her gun, and the sound brings the guards rushing in. Oslo bursts into the room, alarmed, but Hana silences him with a sharp gesture, focused on the voice on the other end of the line. She notices it's modulated, ignoring the man's weak protests. Her sole focus is finding her missing brother, Dewey. She demands answers, warning that failure to cooperate will lead to the same fate as the subdued man. A single gunshot shatters the tense silence, ending the man's part in the confrontation. On the other end of the line, the voice calmly denies having Hana's brother but hints he's nearby. With a cryptic remark about the party nearing its end, the voice advises Hana to stay calm and promises they'll meet again before cutting the connection. Hana absorbs the ominous message, her mind racing. If the party is truly ending, she realizes Giulio must be in immediate danger. Elsewhere on the ship, Giulio issues urgent orders to his subordinates, "Find Hana and bring her to me." His growing determination, laced with desperation, sets the stage for the inevitable consequences to come. Oslo gently takes Hana's hand, urging her to slow down, but she pulls away sharply. Her voice is firm as she demands to know who Mujin Kang's target is. Oslo hesitates, explaining that Mujin is watching them and they need to keep up the pretense of a quarrel. Trying to shift the focus, he changes the subject, but Hana's persistence cuts through. She presses him again, warning that this is his last chance to answer truthfully. With visible reluctance, Oslo finally reveals that Giulio Parenti is the target. Hana's mind races as she questions why someone impersonating Giulio would now want him deceased. Before she can dig deeper, a sniper's laser suddenly locks onto Oslo. Hana reacts instantly, yanking him out of harm's way just in time. Breathing heavily, she warns Oslo that Mujin Kang seems determined to destroy anyone connected to her. She urges him to protect himself, adding coldly that Mujin is no longer their Valentine's Day client. When Oslo asks what she plans to do, she declares she must save Giulio Parenti because he promised to help find her missing brother. Preparing for the dangers ahead, she tears her dress for easier movement. Just as she's about to leave, the door opens, and Giulio steps into the room. Hana orders Oslo to leave, insisting he get away before the other agents become involved. Turning to Giulio, she advises him to go as well, revealing that he is Mujin Kang's target, but Giulio hesitates, questioning her plans. She explains that she's going after Mujin, her gaze falling briefly on the bloodstains streaking his clothes. They decide to step into the room to continue their conversation. Hana immediately asks about his injuries, but Giulio counters with a faint smirk, asking if she really thinks the blood is his. He explains it came from his fight with would-be attackers, his tone casual but his expression weary. Without warning, Giulio pulls her into a tight embrace. Relief floods his voice as he admits he feared for her life, especially after seeing a bullet fly past them earlier. Assured of her safety, he finally shares a critical piece of information. Her brother isn't on the ship and seems to have escaped unharmed. Giulio moves to pour them both a drink while making a quick call, ordering his men to deal with the remaining threats and prepare for his arrival at the hotel. Just as he's about to lift his glass, he suddenly staggers, confusion flickering across his face. He looks at Hana, asking about the drink, and she calmly replies, "I don't drink on the job." Giulio begins to stumble after taking a drink. Suddenly, he pulls his gun and fires several shots into the body of the supposed Mujin Kang. Startled, Hana demands to know what he's doing, her mind racing as she wonders what might have been in the drink he consumed. Before she can get him under control, Lorenzo bursts into the room, announcing that they need to leave immediately. The FBI is swarming the ship. At Yuri Petrov's hotel, Hana and Lorenzo assist Giulio, who is still visibly affected by the drink. Hana warns Lorenzo that Giulio becomes agitated when touched by anyone other than her or him. Lorenzo, unfazed, remarks that she should be used to Giulio's quirks by now. As they enter the hotel, Yuri approaches, assuring them it's a secure location where no one can enter without permission. Yuri examines Giulio briefly and asks if he was drugged or simply knocked out. Too drained to explain, Hana hands Yuri a phone connected to Mujin Kong. She admits she can't unlock it but believes he can. She instructs him to install a location tracker and duplicate the data, emphasizing that the information is crucial. Her tone leaves no room for argument, making it clear she's issuing an order. As they move past Yuri, he suggests Hana use the supplies Rose provided. He reveals that the wine Giulio drank contained a stimulant mixed with an unnamed aphrodisiac. He also adds that the antidote capsule will briefly shock his system but should bring him back to normal quickly. Curious, Hana asks what would happen if they didn't administer the antidote. Yuri warns that leaving Giulio in this state would only complicate things for her. Once they've guided Giulio to the bed, Hana dismisses Lorenzo. He questions why she wants him to leave, but she convinces him by pointing out his injury and urging him not to make her worry. Lorenzo offers to send someone to assist her, but she declines, insisting she can handle the mafia boss alone. Before leaving, Lorenzo gives her a few tips on managing Giulio. Hana contemplates how to wake Giulio but suddenly notices he's no longer on the bed. Hearing the shower running, she heads to the bathroom and finds him fully clothed, standing under the water. She asks if he's coming to his senses, but Giulio either demands she leave or sarcastically suggests she find a different room. Their conversation turns playful, filled with light banter, until Giulio suddenly doubles over in pain. Hana urges him to stay in control, helping him back to his feet. Together, they leave the bathroom, but just as she's about to guide him back to bed, he tilts her head toward him and kisses her. Water drips from his soaked clothes as it pools on the floor beneath them. Their eyes lock, and the kiss grows more fervent. In the heat of the moment, Giulio pulls the hairpin from Hana's hair and suddenly pierces himself with it. Alarmed, Hana demands to know what he's doing, but he just warns her to leave, his voice strained. He tells her that if she stays, he won't be able to stop himself from pouncing on her like an animal. Her glare is sharp as she retorts that she might bleed out one day because of his reckless behavior, but something like this isn't enough to kill her. She then gives him a simple instruction, just hold me. They move to the bed, and while Giulio wraps his arms around her, Hana's thoughts start to spiral. She questions whether she should give him the antidote, even if it sends him into shock. As she debates, Giulio suddenly grips her neck, apologizing in a low, almost tender voice. He tells her that if she's already starting to regret being here, then it's too late to back out. His expression shifts, and he begins to tease her, making ridiculous claims about making every inch of her his until she's completely intoxicated by him. Meanwhile, in a distant part of the city, Gavin Smith returns to a dimly lit hideout, now wearing a different outfit. His partner immediately notices and questions the change, pointing out that he'd been dressed as a waiter during the party. Gavin explains that the waiters were being interrogated, so he had to disguise himself as a delivery guy to escape unnoticed. His partner, however, assures him that no one would have recognized him, even under close scrutiny of the staff list. As the two converse, it's revealed that Gavin's partner is none other than Hana's brother, Dewey. Gavin mentions seeing many faces at the party, but one caught his attention. He tells Dewey that he saw Hana with Giulio Parenti. The way they looked at each other, he adds, made it seem like they were deeply in love. The next morning, Giulio wakes up and lightly brushes his fingers across Hana's face, waking her in the process. She teases him, asking if he's checking to see if she's still alive. He averts his gaze and admits it, confirming her suspicion. Pressing further, Hana asks if he's wondering whether he forced himself on her. With a sly smile, she tells him that last night was simply an exchange to fulfill each other's needs. But inside, she calculates that the more he desires her, the closer she'll get to achieving her own goals. Giulio smirks and remarks that her words suggest she wants the same thing he does right now. She laughs at his attempt and turns away, making it clear she's not in the mood. She warns him not to touch her for the next 2 days and he chuckles, agreeing to her terms, and steals a quick kiss before letting it go. Later, they meet Yuri Petrov, who addresses Hana as one and informs her they've finished examining Moojin Kang's phone. Sliding the device over, he reveals that the last call made from the phone came from inside the ship they were on the previous day. This means that despite using a stand-in, the real Moojin Kang attended the Moon Shipping Company's party. Yuri then asks if Hana gleaned anything useful during her phone call with Moojin Kang. She explains that Moojin claimed not to have Duyi, though she isn't sure if he was being honest. Still, she thinks it's likely true. She adds that with Gavin Smith actively moving, it's clear things aren't going smoothly for Moojin Kang. Shifting the focus, Yuri asks Hana for her opinion on extracting information from Logan. He suspects Moojin Kang might be Logan's client, and since Hana knows Logan better, she could have an edge. Hana says she'd like to help, but Logan is steadfast about protecting his client's privacy. Suddenly, Sei interrupts, handing Hana a photograph. She says it's an enhanced image of the real Moojin Kang and asks if Hana recognizes him. Hana studies the picture, trying to make out the face. Lost in thought, she notes the resemblance to Eunseong and realizes she hasn't seen him all morning. Hana remarks that Romano and Lorenzo are injured, but Eunseong is clearly missing. Lost in thought, Giulio leans in and teasingly asks why she's so absorbed in another man's photo, playfully suggesting she might already be tired of him. He then shares that he's just received an update about the person who betrayed her, revealing that the betrayer was recently the target of a murder attempt. Hana is taken aback by this news and wonders who would want to kill Taejun. Giulio hints that only one person could be behind such an act, and without wasting time, he makes a call to find out Moojin Kang's current location. A man stands in the spotlight, surrounded by a crowd of cameramen. This is Muho Kang, brother of Moojin Kang. He prepares to deliver a public speech, his tone somber and weighty. He declares that foreign criminals have targeted an innocent citizen and mourns the demise of Duyi Lee, a devoted member of the Overseas Narcotics Investigations Team, who died tragically in a terrorist bombing. Muho also reveals that Duyi's colleague, Taejun Choi, lies in a coma, clinging to life. Then, Muho shares another heartbreaking truth. His half-brother, Moojin Kang, CEO of Moon Shipping Company, is the latest victim in this grim chain of events. Muho recounts how, after hosting a party, Moojin was brutally slaughtered, his body discarded into the sea. With visible anguish, he admits it is time to reveal a family secret. Moojin is his estranged half-brother, a bond they only renewed in adulthood. As he broadcasts this shocking revelation, the real Moojin Kang watches the speech on his phone from a restaurant, alive and well. Moments later, Logan Valentine enters the restaurant and confronts Moojin. Logan, stern and resolute, announces he is terminating their contract, accusing Moojin of targeting his agents, a breach of their agreement. Moojin adamantly denies any involvement in the attack and, when questioned further, suggests the FBI might be behind it all. Moojin Kang smirks, turning to Logan Valentine with a look that says he has bigger concerns. With a knowing grin, he gestures to the news broadcast still playing, highlighting the dramatic announcement of Moojin Kang's supposed demise. He points out how Muho Kang's intricate political games have gripped the public, steering them to demand swift justice for the criminals involved, including the elusive Giulio Parenti. Moojin leans in, his eyes sharp and probing, as he poses a single question: who do you think benefits most from all this chaos? Logan falters, his thoughts racing. The implication dawns on him: this may all be unfolding exactly as Moojin planned. The realization chills him, and he resolves to sever ties with Moojin, sensing the man's dangerous cunning. Logan turns to leave, prepared to cut ties with the Moon Shipping Company. But before he can fully express his intent, Moojin interrupts, his tone calm yet magnetic. He makes an enticing offer, 5 times the previous pay. Logan pauses, momentarily caught off guard, before spinning back to face Moojin, questioning what he wants in return. Moojin's response is clear and deliberate. Your job is simple. Protect Hana Lee. Make sure not a single hair on her head is harmed. After their exchange, Moojin Kong, or Eunseong, as he is sometimes known, returns home. He steps into a hot shower, letting the steam envelop him as his thoughts wander. He recalls Hana's behavior at the recent party, analyzing her actions. To him, her emotions seemed fabricated, raising doubts about whether her feelings for Giulio Parenti were genuine or just another act. In his private musings, he dismisses Parenti as an amateur. After what feels like an excessively long shower, he steps out and re-enters the room, only to find Giulio Parenti waiting for him. They exchange a long, charged stare before Eunseong breaks the silence with a cool remark, "Looks like you've got the wrong room." Giulio, unbothered, lights a cigarette and delivers an unexpected message, "You're fired." Eunseong smirks, questioning Giulio's motives and hinting that his real concern might be losing Hana to him. The tension spikes as words turn to action. In a heated moment, the two men grab each other by the collar, their mutual disdain evident. Giulio glares at Eunseong and warns him to stay silent, but Eunseong, ever the provocateur, pushes further. Frustrated, Giulio slams him to the ground. He raises a fist, ready to strike, but before he can follow through, Hana bursts into the room. Her voice cuts through the tension as she demands to know what's happening and instructs Giulio to lower his hand. Reluctantly, Giulio lets go of Eunseong's collar. Hana demands an explanation, her tone firm. Giulio states he's firing Eunseong as her bodyguard. Her eyes widen in surprise, though her mind quickly races. She knows she can't let this happen. If Eunseong is truly Moojin Kong, they need to keep him close and monitor his every move. Before she can respond, Eunseong stands and dusts himself off, reminding Hana of his earlier warning to keep her distance from Giulio. He redirects the conversation to her missing brother, pointing out that the photo she showed him contains an overlooked clue, a message Dui was trying to send. Hana flinches, her curiosity piqued, and asks if he discovered something new. Eunseong smirks. "Indeed, but since I've just been fired, I'm not obligated to share it." He extends his hand toward her, offering a partnership. "Join forces with me, and I'll help you find your brother." Besides, he adds with a sly grin, "Now's not the time to be romantically involved with a mobster." Hana crosses her arms, her tone sharp. "Do you expect me to beg for your help? I don't need you, I can find him on my own." Turning on her heel, she storms out of the room. Giulio follows quickly, his expression unreadable. Once alone in another room, Hana's thoughts spiral. Could Eunseong be right? Her original plan was simple, use Giulio to her advantage. Yet, deep down, she feels a flicker of something she shouldn't, a hope for something more. She shakes her head, determined not to stray from her goal. A knock at the door interrupts her thoughts. Giulio's voice calls out, pleading for her to let him in. Hana snaps, insisting he stay out. As she reaches for the door to send him away, her phone rings. For a moment, hope surges, could it be her brother? She answers, and Dui's voice comes through, filled with urgency. "Hana, are you okay? You need to get out of there immediately. What are you doing with someone like Giulio Parenti? He's involved with the mafia, you can't trust him." Hana freezes, her mind racing as Dui's words sink in. Hana exhales deeply, her voice steady as she speaks into the phone. "Yes, I know Giulio is a mobster, Dui. But I've made my choice. This is the best way to find you." Resolute, she opens the door, letting Giulio into the room. Her brother's voice trembles with concern as he warns her again about the dangers of dealing with a mafia boss, his fear for her safety clear. But Hana stands firm, cutting through his worry with a single question, "Where are you?" Dui hesitates, then admits he can't share too many details over the phone, wary of potential wiretaps. Hana presses him for coordinates instead. After a brief pause, he provides them. Her determination hardens as she promises, "Stay where you are." I'll make sure they pay for what they've done to you. His voice wavers with emotion. I miss you, Hana. Please don't do anything reckless. She softens, her tone gentle. Just wait a little longer, okay? I'll find you. As her conversation ends, she feels a hand gently taking hers. Startled, she turns to find Giulio standing close, his dark eyes calm but intent. I'm coming with you, he says. Hana's brow furrows. Why? This is about finding my brother. There's nothing in it for you. Giulio tilts his head slightly, a hint of mischief in his expression. Because Dewey matters to you. And I don't like that your attention is on someone else. But if helping you means bringing your focus back to me, I'll do what I can. Hana blinks, momentarily caught off guard, but she quickly composes herself. There's something I need to tell you, she begins, her voice low. She explains that during her time as a Valentine's Day agent, she once put a man behind bars. While in prison, the man lost his entire family. Blinded by grief and rage, he swore to make her feel the same pain, vowing to take everything she held dear. At the time, she dismissed his threats as empty words. But then my brother disappeared, she continues, her voice faltering slightly. And for the first time in years, I dreamed about that man. He's gone now, he died years ago. But his words, they still haunt me. It feels like his shadow hasn't left. Hana's voice trembles as she confesses, I've always feared that the chain of malice I set in motion might one day come back to trap me. That's why I keep people at a distance, I'm afraid of letting anyone in. Tears begin to pool in her eyes, spilling over as her emotions overwhelm her. Giulio, ever her steady confidant, reaches out and gently wipes her tears away. Without hesitation, he leans in, pressing a soft, reassuring kiss to her trembling lips. These fears are unfounded, he murmurs, his voice low and comforting. You're stronger than you think. Moved by her vulnerability, Giulio decides it's time to share his own darkness. He takes a deep breath, his gaze distant as he begins. I once had a mother with raven hair and fair skin. She was involved in an affair, but my father, blinded by love, forgave her. My younger brother, Flavio, couldn't. He hated her lover. And then. His voice falters, heavy with the weight of memory. Flavio was killed by that man. I found his body in the chapel. Giulio's expression hardens as he continues. I lost my mind. I hunted that man down and dismembered him, piece by piece, sending what was left to my mother. Then. I killed her too. Slowly. Painfully. I made sure her death was more agonizing than Flavio's. He looks at Hana with shadowed eyes. That's the kind of man I am. Ruthless. Merciless. Even with my own blood. Do you despise me now? Hana's gaze softens, unshaken by his confession. Do you remember the first time we met, in the trailer, she asks gently. You looked like a man who was ready to embrace death. I don't despise you, Giulio. And I'm not afraid of you. If anything, I understand you more now. Her words draw them closer, culminating in a deep, passionate kiss. For a moment, the weight of their past seems lighter, as if they've found solace in each other's scars. Yet, as they part, Hana feels the weight of her secret resolve. She knows this moment is fleeting, a fragile illusion of peace. Once she finds her brother, she will have to leave. 2 days, she tells herself. That's all she can allow herself. But for now, she clings to the intimacy they share, letting it be enough. At Dewey's secluded hideout, Gavin Smith paces, his concern palpable. This situation is spiraling out of control, he says, his voice tinged with frustration. I can't believe Hana and Giulio are involved. Dewey shakes his head firmly. It's not what it looks like, he replies, defending his sister. Hana approached Giulio because of bad intel from Taejun Choi. She didn't have a choice. He pauses before adding, besides, I've already given her my location. We'll clear everything up face to face. Gavin listens, his brow furrowed in thought. He's struck by the depth of Dooye's concern for his sister. Memories of their first meeting flash through his mind: Cambodia, the site of the bombing. Dooye had been relentless, eventually convincing Gavin to join forces with him. Their alliance had seemed straightforward enough, until the shocking news of Mujin Kang's boat party reached them. Gavin recalls the surreal event. Mujin Kang, the infamous manipulator, had invited all the criminals he'd ever impersonated to a grand celebration. What began as an extravagant gathering had devolved into chaos, leaving several prominent figures deceased. The memory of that night unsettles Gavin, not least because it had forced him into an unthinkable position, taking up arms to protect someone as unpredictable as Giulio Parenti. As Gavin sifts through these thoughts, his phone rings abruptly, snapping him back to the present. Answering, he hears an unsettling voice on the other end. "We've got a complication," the caller says curtly. "Check the link we just sent you." When he and Dooye open the link, they find Muho Kang's broadcast insinuating that Mujin Kang is deceased. The caller quickly informs them it's all fake news, but it has already swayed public opinion. That's not the worst of it. Dooye Lee is now wanted for drug trafficking and attempted murder. The FBI and CIA have issued arrest warrants, and someone has uncovered Gavin Smith's connection to Dooye. The caller identifies this person as Manhwa, who is already tracking them down. The caller urges Gavin to run. Without hesitation, he grabs his things, starts the car, and tells Dooye to pack up. Dooye reminds him that his sister is on her way, so Gavin tells him to call her. He even hands Dooye the phone he used during his undercover mission in New York, despite vowing never to use it again after betraying Giulio Parenti. They leave in a rush, and Gavin promises to call the mafia boss as they drive away. Meanwhile, Mujin Kang and Logan Valentine are in a car. Logan casually asks why Giulio Parenti has an issue with him. Mujin admits it's probably because his attempts to get closer to Hana Lee didn't sit well with Giulio. Privately, Mujin reflects that being fired might actually be a safer outcome given the risks he's taking. Just then, Logan gets a notification. He warns Mujin that the FBI is on the move and suggests they leave the area immediately. Coincidentally, Mujin spots the car carrying Dooye and Gavin. Logan instantly recognizes Dooye, Hannah's brother. Mujin orders the driver to follow them and insists they can't lose the car. With a mischievous glint, he declares they'll capture Hannah's brother alive, then he pulls out his gun and begins shooting at their vehicle. In a tense phone call, Giulio speaks urgently with Yuri Petrov, sharing alarming news that the FBI is on the move, with the information coming from Gavin Smith. He stresses that Gavin has advised them to evacuate Hong Kong as quickly as possible. Yuri confirms this and suggests they finish their business and meet at Repulse Bay in the next 15 minutes. However, Giulio grimly explains that leaving immediately isn't an option. Yuri quickly figures out that the problem is related to one. He recommends using the drugs at Giulio's disposal to knock her out, warning him not to mention any concerns about running low on supplies or side effects. Giulio stays silent, his understanding clear through the call. Yuri goes on to explain that the drugs hidden in one's bracelet contain not only a stimulant but also a small amount of propofol, a powerful sleep-inducing agent. He reassures Giulio that the sedative has no side effects, as it's meant for medical use. Giulio now faces a choice: either extract one while she's unconscious or stay put and risk being captured by the FBI. The call ends abruptly. One of Giulio's associates asks what they should do next, and Giulio tells him to organize an evacuation for the team and assures them he'll join them later. He also asks for a syringe, hinting at a more secretive plan in motion. Meanwhile, Mujin Kang keeps firing at Gavin Smith's car as he stays on their tail. Gavin and Dooye, confused, wonder why the car behind them is shooting out of nowhere. Dooye asks if Manhwa has already found them. Despite their questions, they have no idea who's after them. They decide to take a sharp turn off the narrow road, but the car pursuing them stays right on their heels, firing relentlessly. Before they can react, the two cars collide, sending Gavin's vehicle crashing into a guardrail. As the dust settles, Mujin Kong steps out of his car and approaches the wrecked vehicle. Seeing them unconscious inside, he can't help but feel he's achieved his goal. At the same time, Hana prepares to rescue her brother. She tells Giulio with urgency, "We need to hurry. I've decoded the coordinates, and he's close to Stanley Bay." Giulio, entranced by her, takes the opportunity and kisses her deeply. She tries to remind him of the timing, but he doesn't stop. In a quiet, calculated move, he pulls out a syringe and injects it into her neck. Hana, shocked, knocks the syringe from his hand and demands to know what he's doing. But before she can fully process it, drowsiness hits her, and all she hears are Giulio's apologies before she collapses into his arms. Meanwhile, at the chaotic crash site, Mujin Kong yanks open the door of the wrecked car. Dooyi, regaining consciousness, asks who he is and he responds by pointing a gun at Dooyi's chin and mentioning his special relationship with Dooyi's sister. Surprised, Dooyi asks Mujin Kong how he knows his sister and he responds with confidence, "There's a lot more I know than you might think." He thanks Dooyi for sharing the photo earlier, recognizing his skill in hiding the message. He explains that red oak is an odd choice for shipbuilding because it's vulnerable to water damage. By sharing the photo of the floor, he meant to hint that he was aboard an anchored ship, but unfortunately, his sister missed the message. Dooyi, stunned, curses under his breath and demands to know what Mujin Kong wants. Overcome by the situation, he slumps. Remaining calm, Mujin Kong tells Dooyi he can't afford for him to pass out yet, since their conversation hasn't even begun. Just then, Gavin Smith coughs and stares, almost certain that this is the real Mujin Kong. Mujin Kong, surprised, asks if they've met before. Gavin Smith, visibly agitated, challenges him for following them to this remote spot. Mujin Kong replies, "You sure have a lot to say for someone whose life is hanging by a thread." He then points his gun at Gavin and pulls the trigger. A single shot echoes through the air. Logan rushes out, scolding Mujin Kong for going too far this time. Mujin Kong casually responds that he was just giving them a scare. Logan quickly assesses the situation and tells his client that the person in the car is once brother. Before he can finish, a gun is pointed at his head. Mujin Kong coldly asks, "Have you forgotten who your client is?" He warns Logan not to test his patience. Then, he orders him to clean up the scene and get Dooyi and Gavin into their car. As he turns to leave, he comments, "Time to fully embrace my role as the villain." Meanwhile, aboard a ship, Hana jolts awake, shouting her brother's name. Suddenly, it hits her. The surroundings resemble Yuri Petrov's cruise ship. Her thoughts race as she recalls Giulio, wondering why he stopped her from seeing her brother and why he made all those promises of help. Fueled by rage, she strides out of her room and bursts into a meeting. She cautiously asks, "Am I interrupting something important?" Giulio, seated in the meeting, rises as Hana enters and asks how she's feeling. She finds his question painfully ironic, considering he was the one who had forced a syringe into her neck. Suppressing her rising frustration, she looks him in the eye and demands, "Where is my brother?" The room grows uncomfortably silent. After a moment, Giulio admits that her brother is likely no longer at the coordinates he gave her. He explains that he had no other choice. His actions were necessary because the FBI was about to launch a search operation. Hana, torn between anger and disappointment, grabs Giulio by the shirt, her voice trembling as she reminds him of his promise to help her and her misplaced trust in him. Giulio doesn't respond, his expression unreadable as he stares at her. After a long, tense pause, she lets go of his shirt and declares that she's leaving. She's determined to find her brother, even if it means swimming through the open sea. Giulio calls after her as she storms out, but his words go unanswered. As Hana storms off the ship, tears streaking down her face, Giulio reaches for her hand, but she slaps it away, accusing him of being a hypocrite. Her voice trembles with anger as she questions his motives, but before she can say more, her phone rings. Desperately hoping it's her brother, she answers quickly. Instead, A chilling voice introduces himself as Mujin Kong. With a trembling voice, Hana demands to know where her brother is. Mujin, speaking with feigned remorse, admits there was some physical confrontation but reassures her that her brother is alive. He then candidly confesses he intended to kill her brother but stopped because of the striking resemblance between him and Hana. Mujin cryptically hints that she should already know who he really is. He continues, revealing he has traced her location through the call and plans to share her coordinates with the FBI once they hang up. He taunts her, questioning what will happen to the dilettante beside her and warns her not to get caught up in his affairs. Finally, he invites her to join him if she wants to see her brother again. Still on the call, Hana pieces together Mujin's true identity. Her voice tightens as she realizes it's Eunseong Yoo. Mujin chuckles, amused by how quickly she figured it out. Furious, she threatens that the next time they meet, she'll hold a gun to his neck and make him regret his existence. She ends the call and turns to Giulio, demanding to know if he knew any of this. Giulio pulls her into an embrace, murmuring an apology. But Hana, still distraught, pushes for answers about her brother's safety. Giulio reassures her, saying he's already paid the price to protect her brother. When she asks to whom, Giulio calmly replies, to death. He explains that Logan's team, including Valentine, will be watching Mujin Kong closely. Hana, however, remains skeptical, pointing out that Mujin is a client of Logan's. Giulio smirks, noting that mercenaries' loyalty lies with the highest bidder. Despite this, Hana presses Giulio for a guarantee, proposing a deal. She will go to the FBI and testify that Giulio is a victim if it ensures her brother's safety. Surprisingly, Giulio agrees, teasing that she's a bad villain who manipulated him, while he's the nice villain who let it happen. Then, with a sly grin, he promises she won't have to go to the FBI at all. He leans in and cheekily requests a kiss, but Hana narrows her eyes and asks what happens if she refuses. With a mischievous smile, he says he'll simply have to steal one, brushing a kiss against her cheek. Rolling her eyes, Hana grabs his shirt, half playful, half serious, and tells him to stop acting like a dilettante. Pressing against him, she whispers that this might be their last night together. Giulio, smirking, reminds her that she's the one who initiated the moment. Giulio and Hana return to the room. He teases her about being captivated by his body, and she admits it's true but clarifies it's just physical. He jokes about being glad to have one redeeming quality and reminds her that she initiated this, so she'd better be ready. Without hesitation, he leans in and kisses her. Hana reflects inwardly, admitting Giulio can be frustrating, but when he touches her so gently, her heart feels trapped in a spell. Their intimacy deepens as he urges her not to look away and encourages her to kiss him. Hana, still aware that tomorrow might bring separation, resolves to embrace the moment. If this is their last night together, she wants to focus only on holding him and never letting go, allowing herself this one indulgence. The next day, Giulio tenderly strokes Hana's head, kissing her softly. He tells her she can sleep a little longer since they have time and quietly leaves the room. As soon as he's gone, she springs up. She wasn't really asleep and was struggling to keep up the act. Memories of their night together flood her mind, leaving her drained. She grabs her phone and calls Logan, determined to confront him. After a pause, Logan admits Giulio asked him to rescue her brother and that he hadn't planned to hide it. Hana asks about her brother's condition, and Logan assures her his injuries aren't severe. He then apologizes for underestimating Mujin Kang's madness. She presses him for a favor, revealing she'll lead the Operation Valentine's Day is overseeing. Logan is startled and asks if Giulio knows about her plan, but she makes it clear she intends to keep him out of it. With the CIA watching Giulio, she won't risk endangering him. They agree on a strategy, and Hana requests Oslo's involvement. Logan agrees, promises to arrange for explosive ordnance disposal, and asks if she needs anything else, but she continues listing weapons and supplies. Suddenly, the door creaks open. Sei, her collaborator, steps in, signaling the next phase of their plan. Logan asks Hana if anyone else is assisting her. She nods, revealing that someone from Yuri Petrov's side has promised to help. Sei, listening closely, asks if Hana is fully prepared, and she nods confidently as Sei readies a syringe for their next step. Still on the call, Logan grows curious and asks what Hana is doing. She tells him she's implanting a GPS chip into her body, explaining that Mujin Kang's cunning made a standard tracker unreliable. Despite her reassurances, Logan remains uneasy. He asks when the operation will begin, and she replies it's set to start in 32 minutes, and she's confident she'll reach the coordinates in time. Before hanging up, she entrusts Logan with her brother's safety. After finishing the implantation, Sei explains that the GPS chip will activate as soon as Hana enters the water. Hana thanks her, promising to repay her someday, but Sei waves it off, saying her motivation to help comes from a deeper place. Sei then asks if Giulio will approve of this dangerous plan, and Hana admits she's keeping it a secret from him. Worried, Sei warns that Giulio might retaliate if he learns of her involvement. Still, she feels a connection to Hana, like looking at a younger version of herself. Sei earnestly hopes Hana can save her brother and agrees to help, but only if Hana tells her how she feels about Giulio. Later, Hana trains intensively. When Sei approaches, she confirms the guards will buy them time, though not for long. As Hana prepares to leave, she extends her hand for a handshake, but Sei hugs her instead. She thanks Hana for showing how much she truly cares for Giulio. Suddenly, Giulio bursts onto the scene, demanding to know what Hana is doing. She grabs her bag and moves to jump into the water, ordering him not to follow. He begs her to stay and talk, but she insists she never wanted things to come to this. She urges him to leave while he can, warning she won't visit him in prison, and he should return to his turf. With a final goodbye, she leaps into the water. Enraged, Giulio shouts for Lorenzo, commanding him to contact Logan and find out what's happening. He then confronts Sei, who tries to reassure him that Hana's actions are for his sake. Furious, he snaps, accusing Sei of helping Hana swim to her death. Giulio Parenti's frustration boils over as he violently flips the table in front of him, scattering its contents across the room. His voice rises as he demands answers from Sei, his anger cutting through the tense air. Before she can respond, Yuri Petrov steps in, his tone sharp as he calls out to his wife and shields her from Giulio's wrath. Turning his focus to the mafia boss, Yuri issues a stern warning, demanding respect for Sei. Giulio, far from pacified, lashes out, venting his anguish over Hana's reckless choices and their life-threatening consequences. Sei, standing safely behind her husband, silently resolves to keep Hana's earlier confession of love to Giulio to herself. She remains calm, aware that revealing the truth could worsen an already volatile situation. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room elsewhere, Mujin Kang holds Dui hostage. He scrutinizes the young man, remarking on his differences from Hana while acknowledging glimpses of her strength in him. Dui, unbothered by the comparison, steers the conversation to the immediate danger, urging Mujin to abandon his plans and escape. Mujin, however, dismisses Dui's concerns. He insists his actions stem from a desire to save Hana from the mafia's grasp. Mujin shifts the conversation, confessing his longing for Hana and his determination to rescue her. He smirks confidently, revealing his plan to use Dui as a pawn to find his sister. Taken aback, Dui questions how he could lead Mujin anywhere while in captivity. Mujin casually assures him that freedom is just within reach. Intrigued but wary, Dui presses for details. Mujin, brimming with pride, lays out his strategy. Logan will rescue Hana, setting the stage for a hostage exchange, Hana for her twin brother. He's confident Hana's love for her sibling will compel her to comply. As Mujin revels in his plan, his phone rings, cutting through the tension. Expecting news of Logan's arrival, he answers, only to hear Hana's voice instead. She questions his search for Logan, her tone cold and distant. Mujin's confusion deepens when gunfire suddenly erupts. From a helicopter hovering above, Hana unleashes a hail of bullets, scattering Mujin's men. The chaos provides Dui with a brief moment of hope as his sister's determination shines through. Over the sound of the gunfire, Hana reminds Mujin of a promise she made, to have a gun pointed at his throat the next time they met. Mujin freezes, realizing she meant every word. Mujin Kang bursts into laughter, clearly amused by Hana's arrival. He tightens his grip on Dui's neck while pressing a gun to his head. With a sly smile, he asks if she's here to rescue her brother, praising her bold strategy. He hints at striking a deal, but before Hana can respond, Logan's voice cuts through, delivering urgent news. Logan informs Hana that Gavin Smith is trapped on the 14th floor and advises her to prioritize the rescue. He acknowledges her emotional turmoil but points out that Mujin likely won't harm Dui without reason, especially if he's open to negotiation. Referring to Dui as the small fry, Logan urges Hana to focus on the immediate crisis. Hana doesn't hesitate. Deploying a rope from the helicopter, she signals her intent to ascend the building. She turns to Mujin Kang and tells him to wait his turn, she'll be back for him soon. With unwavering resolve, she scales the building and breaks into the 14th floor, locating Gavin Smith. While Hana makes her daring rescue, Dui takes the chance to challenge Mujin Kang. He taunts him, warning that time is running out. Unfazed, Mujin smirks, cryptically suggesting that Dui's survival depends on how useful he proves as a human shield. On the 14th floor, Hana reports to Logan that she has Gavin Smith secured. Logan quickly informs her that Mujin Kang is heading for the basement. Removing Gavin's gag, Hana is taken aback when he enthusiastically greets her, calling her one. He insists that Mujin be captured alive and pledges to uncover crucial documents that could exonerate her brother. Hana smirks and threatens to re-gag him if he doesn't cooperate. Gavin protests, promising to move quickly. Hana reminds him that she wouldn't be there if it weren't absolutely necessary. She strides to the door, kicking it open with force. Her eyes widen as a group of Mujin Kang's henchmen rush toward them. Wasting no time, Hana commands Gavin to stick close, warning that his life depends on it. She leaps into action, engaging the attackers in a fierce and calculated fight. After swiftly taking them down, she turns to Gavin and coldly reminds him, if he wants Mujin alive, he'd better keep up. As they race through the chaos, she casually mentions that she saved him before her brother, teasing that he owes her one. He shoots back, suggesting he could repay her by saving her twin. With a determined nod, he promises to do his best if they survive this mess. Reaching the control room, Hana turns to Gavin Smith, asking if the files exposing Mujin Kang's crimes are backed up here. He confidently confirms and starts securing the evidence, navigating the system with ease. He reassures Hana, understanding how much is at stake for her brother and Giulio. As they wait for the data to download, the tension breaks when Mujin Kang's voice cuts through. He strides into the room, holding Dui in a chokehold with a gun pressed to his head. Smirking, he mocks Hana for prioritizing files over her brother's life. Tightening his grip, he challenges her with a taunt, daring her to act. Hana raises her weapon, coolly reminding him she's armed too. She orders Dui to duck and fires with precision, breaking the handcuffs and freeing him. Mujin Kang stumbles, still pointing the gun at Dui, demanding he back off. But Hana quickly disarms him with a clean shot, warning him to surrender. Kang, unfazed, bursts into unsettling laughter. He casually heads toward the elevator, dismissing her command with a smug, "No can do." As Mujin leaves, Hana urgently asks Gavin how much longer the download will take and he replies calmly, 99%. Relief flickers across Hana's face. But before she can act, Mujin Kang reappears, grabbing her and dragging her into the elevator. Locked in an intense stare, Mujin smirks and taunts her, claiming it's just the two of them now. Hana, unshaken, shoots back that while his boldness is noted, he's crossed the line. Unbothered, he grins and says he thinks he's fallen for her all over again. As Hana realizes her injury coincides with the location of her implanted GPS chip, she wonders if the earlier collision caused it. Blood quietly seeps through her clothes as her mind spirals into this grim realization. Before her thoughts can settle, Mujin Kang interrupts, demanding her attention. Hana, unfazed, counters that she never imagined he could be this insane. Ignoring his attempts to dominate the conversation, she asserts her independence, making it clear that she alone decides who gets her focus. Unbothered by her defiance, Moojin smirks and steers the conversation to her future with Giulio Parenti. He paints a bleak picture, claiming she's cut off from any chance of returning to Korea and doubting Italy would accept her after the lives she's taken today and her ties to the mafia. Leaning closer, he proposes an alliance, a way out, but his pitch is interrupted by ominous sounds from the building. Confused, Moojin wonders why the noise is spreading beyond the basement, where the bomb was supposed to detonate. The building trembles around them, and Hana, unbothered, informs him that he's not the only one skilled with explosives. With alarms blaring, she reveals the site will soon transform from a crime scene to a collapsing ruin. Outside, Dewey and Gavin Smith manage to escape, but Dewey hesitates, unable to abandon his twin sister. Gavin urges him to honor the promise he made to Hana, reminding him she wouldn't want him to risk his life for nothing. Despite Gavin's reasoning, Dewey wrestles with the thought of going back. Before he can act, a convoy of military vehicles and helicopters arrives, leaving Dewey stunned and questioning their sudden presence. Inside the building, Hana remains trapped, her leg injury worsening as blood loss takes its toll. Moojin Kong, still with her, casually remarks on her reckless plan to bring down the entire building. Hana, frustrated by his commentary, cuts him off, focusing on the pressing threat of depleting oxygen. Moojin leans closer, noting her dizziness and labored breathing. He warns her that she's close to passing out, which could cost her life. Despite the dire situation, he attempts to distract her by sharing a personal story. He reveals the name given to him by his adoptive parents, Eunseong Yoo. He recounts the profound sense of belonging he felt with the family that embraced him despite lacking biological ties. Their love gave him purpose, but tragedy struck, taking them away too soon. Left adrift and half-mad with grief, he spiraled into the dark world of drug dealing. During this tumultuous time, he encountered Muho Kong, whom he initially saw as a savior. Yet, fate led him into the clutches of Moojin Kong instead. He confesses his longing for a fresh start, revealing that he once planned to leave Moojin Kong behind and reclaim the name Eunseong Yoo. But irony intervened, he fell for the very person who unraveled his plans. Aware of their dire circumstances, he admits this might be their last moment together and gathers the courage to ask Hana if, even briefly, she ever considered choosing him. Before she can respond, loud banging disrupts the tense silence. The elevator doors shudder as someone pounds on them from the outside. Suddenly, light streams through the cracks, revealing Giulio Parenti. Without hesitation, he reaches for Hana, pulling her into a protective embrace. Despite her warnings, Giulio refuses to leave her, vowing never to let her go again. In his arms, Hana unexpectedly collapses, her hand slipping from his grasp. Rage ignites in Giulio as he glares at Moojin Kong, demanding if this was his ultimate satisfaction. The charged moment is broken by the sound of sirens and the arrival of police outside the building. Emerging with Hana in his arms, Giulio is immediately arrested by the authorities, accused of involvement in the Mun shipping cruise ship shooting, murder, and drug trafficking. Amid the standoff, every officer has their weapon aimed at Giulio Parenti. Unshaken, he locks eyes with them, questioning if they truly intend to shoot an injured civilian seeking help. Commanding their attention, he orders them to step aside as he gently lays Hana down for the waiting medical team. Running his fingers softly through her hair, he reassures her unconscious form that everything will be okay, because she's Hana Lee. As he stands, Dewey storms toward him, furious and cursing, demanding to know what he did to his sister. Without warning, Dewey throws a punch, swearing he'll kill him. Giulio, calm and composed, apologizes but firmly states that only Hana has the right to deal with him. Unmoved by the apology, Dewey attempts another strike, but Giulio blocks it effortlessly. In a measured tone, he informs him that he allowed one free hit but insists they focus on Hana's condition for now. Their tense standoff is interrupted by an unfamiliar voice sarcastically asking if they're filming a melodrama. The speaker, Matvey Sergey, steps forward, announcing that every criminal he's been hunting has conveniently gathered in one place. He warns against escape, declaring they're all caught red-handed. Giulio, unimpressed, asks if the CIA has nothing better to do than harass law-abiding citizens. Sergey smirks, retorting that Giulio is the most tempting target he's ever encountered. Wasting no time, he orders the officers to surround them, claiming criminals belong behind bars. As Sergey prepares to handcuff Giulio, Gavin Smith bursts onto the scene, insisting that Giulio and Dewey aren't the culprits. Confused, Sergey demands an explanation, but Gavin produces a flash drive filled with evidence from Edward Liu's hideout. He argues passionately that the real culprit is Edward Liu and that the two men in question are innocent. Sergey, skeptical, dismisses the USB as unverified and refuses to budge. Before the argument can escalate, a car screeches to a halt nearby. Giulio tosses a card at Sergey's feet, coolly telling him to contact his attorney if he has any issues. He has a hospital visit to make. With that, he climbs into the car, which speeds away as Sergey fumes, shouting after him that this isn't over. Later that day, Giulio sits by Hana's bedside as she stirs awake. Disoriented, she slowly realizes where she is and who is with her. Her gaze lands on Giulio, her newfound lover, who calls her name the moment he notices she's awake. Gripping her hand tightly, his expression is weighed down by concern. Hana, ever the optimist, laughs lightly and teases him, saying she'd rather not wake up to his gloomy face. His response is a deep, relieved sigh. She interrupts, asking if he was worried about her and apologizing for the trouble, but he shakes his head, squeezing her hand gently, and confesses that he's just glad she's okay. Their kiss deepens, and they find themselves drawn to the bed. Amid the passion, Giulio Parenti confesses his fear of losing Hana forever. As he tries to focus on their intimate moment, she repeatedly interrupts, insisting there's something urgent they need to discuss. Finally, he relents, asking what's troubling her, and she anxiously inquires about her brother's well-being. Giulio reassures her, explaining that Dewey is fine, receiving treatment, and likely asleep given the late hour. Relieved, Hana relaxes, but Giulio hopes the interruptions are over. Pulling her closer, he murmurs that he's been holding back for too long and wants to pick up where they left off. In the next scene, Sei confronts Hana, upset that she wasn't informed about the plan to bomb the building. Tearfully, she admits her fear of losing Hana and confesses she worried Hana might not make it out alive. Hana, attempting to comfort her, brings up Sei's pregnancy, urging her not to cry for the baby's sake. Despite this, Sei blames herself for getting involved. To Sei's surprise, Hana gives her a quick, reassuring kiss, crediting her survival to Sei's actions. Giulio Parenti and Yuri Petrov, watching nearby, exchange knowing looks as the two women share this moment of affection. Yuri interrupts, addressing Hana with a question about her plans upon returning to Korea. He mentions hearing a rumor about her becoming a bodyguard at the Blue House. Surprised, Hana glances at Giulio before denying she ever discussed such plans with Yuri. Yuri smirks, suggesting that secrets are never safe from him. He offers to provide evidence clearing her brother's name, but only if she hands Mujin Kong over to him. Sei, shocked, asks her husband if this means Mujin Kong will be released, and Yuri explains that Mujin will be handed over to the FBI to allow Gavin Smith to claim credit. However, he cryptically hints that Mujin might escape prison, as troublemakers often do. Hana, recalling Mujin Kang's earlier story, agrees to consider Yuri's deal but insists he must first convince her brother. Meanwhile, in a tense interrogation scene, Dewey confronts Mujin Kong, demanding answers. Calmly, Mujin provides three names: Mujin Kong, Edward Liu, and Eunseong Yoo, leaving Dewey questioning how many lives the man before him has truly lived. Amid the intense interrogation, Dewey Lee delivers unsettling news to his captive, Mujin Kong. He reveals that once they arrive in Cambodia, the FBI will be waiting for him. To complicate matters, Yuri Petrov, a man with his own agenda, seems equally eager to claim Mujin. Despite the mounting pressure from such formidable forces, Doo-yi remains steadfast, refusing to bend to the whims of a criminal. Mujin, ever the provocateur, responds with a sly smirk, remarking on the irony of the situation. Doo-yi is interrogating him aboard a ship owned by a notorious criminal. This remark infuriates Doo-yi, who leans in closer, his anger palpable. He challenges Mujin's smugness, making it clear that his restraint stems from his love and concern for his sister, Hana. Mujin seizes the opportunity to shift the dynamic, pointing out the similarities between Doo-yi and Hana. With a calculated grin, he admits a certain admiration for Doo-yi, though it's met with cold rejection. Unfazed, Mujin pivots to his next play, dropping a tantalizing offer, information about his criminal brother, Muho Kong. He spins a tale of intrigue, detailing Muho's extensive drug operations in Cambodia and his current bid for political office. The revelation raises the stakes, as Mujin hints at the danger Muho poses and the potential leverage Doo-yi could gain from knowing more. He artfully tries to manipulate Doo-yi's moral compass, framing his cooperation as a chance to take down a greater evil. Just as the tension threatens to boil over, Hana enters the room, bringing a dose of rationality to the charged atmosphere. She doesn't waste time on pleasantries, cutting straight to the point. If Mujin truly wants to eliminate his brother, she suggests, he should handle the matter himself. Her sharp words challenge his willingness to act and expose his reliance on manipulation to achieve his goals. Mujin narrows his eyes, the playful smirk returning. "And how," he asks, "am I supposed to deal with my brother when your chains keep me bound?" She informs him that assassins are after him, their orders to kill him despite his supposed death raising questions about his survival. Revealing that he faked his demise to escape his past, she argues that his very existence now threatens Muho Kong. To silence him permanently, his brother has likely ordered his execution. Hana also exposes Mujin's attempt to manipulate Doo-yi into becoming a pawn in his twisted game, her words cutting through his defenses. After a tense silence, Mujin Kung bursts into laughter, grudgingly admitting that Hana has bested him. But Hana isn't done. Armed with information from Yuri Petrov, she confronts him with the news that Muho Kong recently entered Cambodia. Cornered, Mujin Kang faces a grim choice, and Hana seizes the moment to propose a deal. Later, Hana sits alone, lost in thought. Her mind races with questions. Is Doo-yi truly safe now? Will Mujin Kang accept her proposition? Can she clear her brother's name? And then there's Giulio Parenti, a complication she hadn't fully anticipated. The risks of aligning herself with a mafia boss could jeopardize her aspirations to work at the Blue House. With her future hanging in the balance, Hana forces herself to prioritize logic over emotion, knowing that reckless choices could lead to regret. Her musings are interrupted by Giulio Parenti's arrival. Intrigued by her pensive expression, he asks what's on her mind. Hana flashes him a teasing smile and replies, "You." He leans in to kiss her forehead, softening the moment with tenderness. He informs her that the ship will dock the next day, his tone carrying an air of optimism as he takes her hand and expresses his desire to bring her and Doo-yi to his villa. But when she pulls her hand away, hesitation flickering in her eyes, Giulio's smile fades. Hana gently declines, explaining that she needs to visit her brother's house in Phnom Penh. Giulio's surprise is evident, and he hesitates before asking the question weighing heavily on his mind, "Does this mean goodbye?" Giulio Parenti, visibly reluctant to let Hana go, leans gently on her shoulder, his disappointment clear. With a quiet plea, he asks if she can grant him a little more time before considering parting ways. Hana, however, reassures him with a soft smile. This isn't the end, she promises. She shares her intention to take time off work to visit him, or, if he's willing, he can come to Korea. Her confidence in finding a way to make their relationship work seems to catch him off guard. His gaze searches hers as he hesitantly asks, "So, you have no intention of leaving me?" With a deep breath, Hana finally bares her soul. She confesses that she not only likes him but loves him. The words hang in the air, charged with vulnerability, before she pulls him into a warm embrace. The mafia boss, usually so composed, lets his mask slip, his surprise and joy unmistakable. "You're mine then," he whispers as he holds her close. Later, the scene transitions to the two lounging by the ship's pool, glasses of wine in hand. Giulio comments that today might be their last day together. Hana, however, corrects him with a determined tone, insisting it's not the end. Moved by her unwavering spirit, Giulio surprises her by placing a kiss on her leg. The unexpected gesture catches Hana off guard. Giulio, once a man resigned to the monotony of his life, now finds himself rejuvenated. He reflects on how he once viewed life as purposeless and even welcomed the thought of death, but now everything has changed because of her. "Meeting you made life worth living again," he says before passionately declaring his love. The two share a kiss that feels like a promise, sealing the emotions they've both kept guarded for too long. As the ship prepares to dock, the inevitability of parting weighs heavy. Sei bids Hana farewell with an invitation to visit her on the island someday, while Giulio clasps Hana's hand one last time. He hands her a discreet phone, his fingers brushing against hers. "Come to me whenever you want," he murmurs, his voice filled with both hope and longing. With a heavy heart, Hana steps onto another ship with her brother, watching Giulio disappear from view. On board their new vessel, Dui approaches Hana, his tone serious. He reveals his plan to return to Korea after dealing with Taejun Choi, asking if she will accompany him. Before she can respond, a sudden commotion erupts from a neighboring ship. The twins observe the chaos, realizing that someone is attempting to help Mujin Kong escape. Hana, concerned, questions her brother about his stance on the matter, expecting him to oppose any intervention. However, Dui surprises her with his resolve. His disdain for Mujin Kong is evident, but his greater fear lies in the prospect of Muho Kong ascending to the presidency. Dui firmly believes that if Mujin Kong survives, he will be their best weapon against Muho Kong. Resolute in their mission, the twins share a determined look. "We'll finish what we started," Hana says, her voice steady. Taejun Choi sits in a hospital room, gripping his phone tightly as he frantically explains his situation. His voice trembles as he tells the person on the line that Muho Kong is after him, more determined than ever to end his life. Taejun recalls narrowly surviving their last encounter but admits he might not be so lucky this time. Fear clouds his every word. As he pleads his case, Hana casually walks into the room, interrupting him with a comment about how loud his panic sounds. Her sudden appearance startles Taejun, making him drop his phone. Recovering quickly, he demands to know how she found him, but she smirks and tells him he looks like he's seen a ghost. Before Taejun can respond, Dee climbs in through the window, answering Taejun's frantic question about his whereabouts. Hana, unfazed, reminds Taejun of her earlier promise to kill him the next time they crossed paths. She then asks Dui for his thoughts on how to deal with Taejun. Without hesitation, Dui suggests they make his punishment as painful as possible. Terrified, Taejun begs for mercy. Hana coldly informs him that even if they let him go, Muho Kong will make sure he never makes it back to Korea alive. She leans closer, her voice icy, and asks, "Do you want to live?" Before he can answer, the screech of tires announces Muho Kang's arrival. Muho steps out of his car, his eyes locked on Taejun. He notes that Taejun must truly want to survive, hiding in such a remote hospital. With chilling finality, Muho declares that today will be the day he ends Taejun's life. Moments later, the door slams open. Muho storms into the room, pointing out that Taejun's injuries are worse than expected. He mocks him, saying it might have been easier if he had just died earlier. Taejun, trembling with fear, accuses Muho of failing to warn him about the dangerous drug ties. But Muho shifts the blame, saying it was Taejun's leak of evidence that ruined everything. Muho abruptly changes the subject, asking where Dui is. Taejun deflects, questioning if Muho plans to harm Dui too. The tension spikes as Muho pulls out a gun and presses it against Taejun's head, demanding answers. Taejun denies knowing anything, and Muho coldly decides it's time to kill him. Panicked, Taejun screams Hana's name, begging for her help. Muho pauses, confused by his cry, but the sound of fighting outside catches his attention. Moments later, Hana walks in, calm and composed. Muho swings the gun toward her, demanding to know if she recognizes him. Hana meets his gaze without flinching, identifying him as Muho Kong, a member of the National Assembly, or more accurately, a criminal. Then she delivers a shocking revelation: the entire scene is being streamed live in South Korea. Muho checks his phone, confirming her claim. Distracted, he doesn't see Hana draw her weapon. She levels it at him, listing his crimes: drug trafficking, attempted murder, hiring assassins, and more. The live audience floods the stream with damning comments. Hana smirks and asks him one final question: "What's your next move?" As comments from the live broadcast flood in, Muho Kong quickly retreats, leaving the hospital without a word. Taejun Choi, still shaken, questions Hana's choice to let him go despite his crimes. Before he can press further, Dooyi storms into the room. With a sharp slap, Dooyi reprimands Taejun for daring to give orders about his sister. Hana intervenes calmly, assuring Dooyi that someone else will handle Muho Kong. Stepping outside, she watches Muho flee into the night. She remarks quietly that his real downfall is only beginning. Intrigued, Taejun asks if this means their troubles are over, but Dooyi interrupts, warning him to stay alive, because once he serves his sentence, Dooyi promises to come for him. With that, he slams the door shut, and the twins leave the hospital together. Back home, Hana informs Dooyi about a call from Logan revealing that Muho Kang's men have raided her house in Korea. Concerned, Dooyi asks if she plans to join him there, but she shakes her head, explaining that her face being exposed in the live stream makes it impossible for her to return now. When he suggests she consider joining Giulio Parenti, she hesitates, admitting she's not ready to make that choice. Dooyi reflects on their contrasting paths, her role as a protector versus his hardened acceptance of losing allies. Sensing her discomfort, he changes the subject to his upcoming flight but surprises her by urging her to go to Giulio Parenti. He confesses his worry for her safety and says he wants her to find happiness, even if it means parting ways. He thanks her for saving him and tells her to live life on her terms before pulling her into a heartfelt hug. Days later, Dooyi successfully returns to Korea. News outlets explode with coverage of an arrest warrant issued for Muho Kong, detailing his crimes. The scandal dominates public attention. At the same time, the live stream exposure reveals Hana's identity, abruptly ending her fledgling career as a Blue House bodyguard. Lying on her bed, Hana reflects on her brother's parting words, and just then, her phone buzzes, interrupting her thoughts. Picking it up, she sees GPS coordinates blinking on the screen. Her mind races, recalling Giulio Parenti's cryptic message and wondering if he had installed a tracker on the phone he gave her. Frowning, she studies the coordinates. One likely points to Giulio's location, but the second dot puzzles her. Who else could it be? As the 2 points move closer together, a knock at her door pulls her from her thoughts. Opening it, she freezes in surprise. Standing before her is Mujin Kong. Startled, she questions Mujin Kong about his unexpected visit, but instead of answering, he urgently asks to use the bathroom, explaining that his blood-stained clothes could get him mistaken for a threat. As she watches him clean up, her curiosity gets the better of her, and she inquires about his gun. Mujin shrugs, admitting he discarded it when he ran out of bullets and thanking her for her earlier intervention. With a smirk, he mentions how her actions spooked Muho Kong enough to make him hire 15 bodyguards. Intrigued, Hana presses further, asking if he dealt with Muho Kong. He shakes his head, explaining that Muho deserves a more intricate fate than death. After his shower, Hana offers him antibiotics, painkillers, and an empty room nearby to rest. Their conversation shifts as she brings up the mysterious dots on her GPS. Mujin reveals that Giulio Parenti implanted a tracker in him as a condition of their arrangement. The persistent beeping grows louder, signaling someone's approach. Mujin suggests they step outside, hinting that the visitor might be Giulio Parenti himself. Hana's thoughts race as they walk to the door, her mind lingering on the possibility that the other GPS could be her lover. The door swings open, and her heart leaps. It is him. Without hesitation, she rushes into his arms, embracing him tightly. Before she can ask how he found her, he silences her with a passionate kiss and teases her for making that her first question after so much time apart. He confesses that her departure left him reeling, realizing he couldn't endure even a single day without her. Worse, it felt like she had deliberately chosen to stay away, and the uncertainty of whether she'd return nearly drove him mad. That's why he had to find her. With urgency, he explains that going back to Korea is not an option for her right now. Instead, he invites her to come with him, hinting at a surprise he's eager to share. So, they embark on an excursion, and he unveils a majestic building. He casually asks if the Parenti family castle meets her standards. Hana is taken aback by the grandeur and admits it's impressive, but her curiosity gets the better of her. She asks why he brought her to such a place. He smiles and declares that he wants to introduce her to his family. However, before that reunion, there are some pressing matters they need to handle first. As Hana ascends the grand staircase, she's struck by the unusual silence in the mansion. The place is vast, but there are no servants in sight. Just as she's about to comment on the eerie quiet, Giulio Parenti slips behind her, his hand circling her waist as he pulls her into a secluded corner. With a mischievous smile, he teases, asking if she enjoys having an audience eavesdrop on her. Confused, Hana wonders if this is part of what he meant when he mentioned something they needed to do first. Instead of answering, Giulio silences her with a kiss. Hana, momentarily distracted, wonders if anyone might walk in on them, but he reassures her, telling her he's given orders that they aren't to be disturbed until the morning. Relaxed, Hana decides to let go and enjoy the moment. As their kiss deepens, the door suddenly swings open, prompting them to move further into the room. Giulio playfully pushes her onto the bed, breathless, and declares that from now on, even if she tells him to stop, he won't. Oddly, that's exactly what she's been wanting all along. The air grows heavier, and Hana, caught up in the tension, finally admits her feelings for him. However, instead of responding in kind, Giulio takes her hand and corrects her softly. "You should have said, 'I love you too.'" Later, as they lie together in bed, Giulio brings up the subject of a security specialist. He suggests that if Hana joins him, she could start her own company, eliminating the need for outsourcing. Hana, skeptical, asks when he started planning this, and he confesses it was before she betrayed him to save her brother. Teasing him, Hana reminds him that she hasn't accepted his proposal yet. She jokingly tells him she doesn't come cheap, and if the terms aren't right, she'll walk away. Giulio, however, insists that after all the charm she's cast on him, she can't just leave. With a grin, he declares she won't be going anywhere until she changes her last name to Parenti. He then casually reveals that he's essentially declared war on his rigid old grandfather. Hana, puzzled, doesn't immediately grasp his meaning, but he clarifies that by old man, he means his grandfather. He mentions a birthday banquet for his grandfather the next day, which prompts Hana to ask if this is what he meant by introducing her to his family. Leaving her on edge, Giulio tells her there are a few things they need to prepare. The next day, dressed in elegant attire, Giulio steps out of the room, asking if Hana is ready. She nods, taking his hand, and together they walk out. As Hana and Giulio step into the grand banquet hall, the atmosphere is alive with conversation and murmurs, all eyes subtly turning toward the mafia boss. Giulio, sensing her attention, playfully teases her about potential jealousy. He reassures her that his only intention is to exchange pleasantries with his grandfather, and it won't take long. He follows it up with a gentle kiss on her head, further easing her mind. Despite the light-hearted exchange, Hana remains skeptical, questioning whether this event is truly a birthday party for an elderly man. Just then, the elderly patriarch of the family, Giulio's grandfather, arrives, flanked by two younger companions. He casts a pointed remark about the audacity of bringing a foreigner into the family, despite his earlier warnings. Giulio responds boldly, declaring that Hana is the one for him, causing the old man to raise an eyebrow at her youthful appearance. Not one to back down, Hana cheekily comments that she's probably older than the younger women accompanying the old man, which earns her a sharp glare and the label of brazen from him. Unfazed, she smirks and announces her intention to explore the mansion, eager to avoid the impending family drama. Giulio warns her in a hushed tone to be cautious, revealing that the environment is far from ordinary, it's a mafia den. As she walks away, the old man, still disapproving, mutters to Giulio that perhaps Hana could be kept as a mistress. Giulio immediately rejects the suggestion, reaffirming his commitment to her. He then turns to Romano, who hands him an envelope containing the documents for the transfer of island ownership, including the beaches surrounding the manor. Giulio declares that he has upheld his part of their deal and demands his grandfather refrain from meddling in his personal life. The old man, however, smirks and crumples the document, signaling his men with a flick of his fingers. They rush toward Hana, weapons drawn. The old man, puzzled, comments on Giulio's pushing him to such extremes. But to his surprise, Hana swiftly takes down his men, each one falling to the ground in defeat. The old man watches, bewildered, as Hana confidently steps forward. She addresses him as Grandpa in perfect Italian, dismissing his objections. With graceful confidence, she asserts that Giulio Parenti is hers, regardless of his disapproval. Meanwhile, Muho-kong hurries through the thick underbrush, his breath ragged and his eyes darting behind him. He scoffs, certain that there's no way they've tracked him this far into the remote wilderness. A brief surge of relief fills him as he nears a safe house, thinking of the mercenary group that is waiting for him. They had been all too willing to let him use it, further fueling his growing confidence. As he approaches the refuge, Muho reminds himself that he's already reached out to Korea for help, he just needs to wait for the right moment. As his mind churns, he briefly considers the seemingly contradictory actions of Mujin-kong, how the man bites the hands that feed him. Before he can contemplate further, however, an unexpected presence suddenly startles him. To his shock, Mujin-kong materializes behind him, wearing a wry smile. With a casual tone, Mujin simply says, "Had to bite. It was the only way to ensure my survival." In a tense standoff, Muho-kong demands to know who dares to hold a knife to his throat. His brother, a figure shrouded in menace, coldly reveals himself as the one raised by the notorious Muho-kong. Fear flickers in Muho-kong's eyes as he asks how his brother found him, but the question only fuels an even more intense reaction. Mujin-kong presses the knife harder, challenging Muho's audacity to question him. With a chilling tone, he orders Muho to return to Korea, turn himself in, and serve a year in prison, warning that any disobedience would result in a slit throat. He then adds a sinister note, Muho-kong would be wise to forget about Dui and Hana Lee. If he insists on pursuing them, their paths will cross again in a year. Mujin-kong swings the knife with finality and exits, but as he walks through the bushes, his thoughts turn inward. He remembers the sight of the mafia boss and his lover, their affection undeniable. Hana Lee's rejection of him is still fresh in his mind, a memory that lingers despite the passage of time. With a quiet mutter, he reflects that perhaps this is truly goodbye. Meanwhile, high above the ground, Hana and Giulio soar through the sky in a helicopter. She, intrigued, leans in to ask where they're headed. Giulio, ever playful, counters with a question of his own, asking where she'd like to go. With a light sigh, she plays along, climbing on top of him and teasing that anywhere is fine as long as they're together. Giulio, with a mischievous grin, compliments her, saying she's dazzling enough to blind him. The playful banter continues, their teasing turning into a deep, passionate kiss that speaks volumes about their connection. 3 months later, at Tianamo headquarters, a group of men finds themselves trapped on the rooftop, unsure of who will come to their rescue. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a helicopter cuts through the air, and they realize it's one. With determination in her step, Hana lands, effortlessly communicating with her team through her earpiece. Curious about the intrusion in the building, she learns that the newly formed gang has 2 goals: to target Tianamo's advanced technology and to search for drugs and firearms, likely due to their knowledge of the CEO's history. Armed with this information, Hana vows to make sure the intruders regret their decision. After landing, she steps out of the helicopter and engages with the men on the rooftop. She singles out a Grand Prix champion affiliated with the company, confirming his identity and assuring his safety. Just then, her phone rings. It's Giulio. She briskly updates him on the mission, but the mafia boss has an unusual request. He wants her to eliminate the threat without shedding a single drop of blood. If she fails, he warns of dire consequences. Hana grins, reassured by Giulio's faith in her abilities, and promises to get the job done. Armed to the teeth, she strides into the building, her gun pointed at the gang. With a casual chow, she sets the stage for the resolution of this chapter. If you enjoyed this story, leave us a comment. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.